Hey, everybody. Oh, wait, isn't it Mormonism Live is Wednesday night?
Yeah,
Bill, what's Rebecca doing
we'll
here?
see you on Monday.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just have to be in on everything. I'm that kind of a person. I'm like Mrs. Kravitz on Bewitched.
You don't have to tell our audience what Mrs. Kravitz is on.
I might. I actually might.
Were you doing what were you doing? Did you have an itch on your nose there, Bill, for a second?
I was shaking my nose like Bewitched. Yes, Samantha.
That's exactly
and
what
I thought I
looked
could
like
solve this conundrum by doing that, but we're all still here. So
well, I'm so glad that you're on the show tonight, Rebecca, because this is a 3-person smackdown of Book of Mormon / Scripture Central's newest release in the marvelous work, How Great the Evidence series, which dropped last Sunday, just 3 days ago. And now they're in jolly old and talking about English things, meeting English people, and seeing English sites. And apparently England is going to come to the rescue of the Book of Mormon and prove it is true.
And I have a funny feeling that having done a few episodes dealing with this stuff already, that's not going to be the case. And we're going to show lots of holes and lots of weaknesses in the things that they're doing and pointing out.
Yeah, it's up to 19,000 views I saw earlier today, which I think is kind of a slow start for them compared with the other ones that they've done. But they're certainly up there. Hopefully our views will be at least as high. Please share this with your friends and family, anybody who might happen to cross paths with this particular marvelous work video, so that they can get the straight scoop on what's really going on, what they're saying, what they're not saying, and why they're not saying it.
And knowing that they were going to go into Shakespeare and other things that happened, we thought it was very important to get some boots on the ground. So we sent Radio Free Mormon over to the area to sort of scout it out and get some preliminary information on Shakespeare. You already have a wealth of knowledge on Shakespeare and his plays, but this was an opportunity to get a little more information as we prepared for this episode.
Yes, we should play the first few seconds of this video from Marvelous Work, because it looked like the trip that I took over there to the same place, London, England, from April 10th to April 17th.
Let's see if I can do that. Here we go. I hope this is the one.
But why on earth are we starting our episode here? What on earth does Shakespeare have to do with the Book of Mormon? Well,
no, that's the second one.
You're not okay. Let me see if we got a different one. So I don't see a video at the beginning.
Yeah, it starts with 00, and then it goes through to where that one started.
Let me, okay, give me 2 seconds. Let's do this.
What are you going to do? Are you going to pull up the regular video?
I'm going to have to. It's, unless, Maven, you got it handy there. I think maybe it's in the slideshow, but it might be in a different place or something. So give me
down there. The timestamp does not start at 00.
Yeah, no worries. Give me 2 seconds here. I think I can.
It'll start at the beginning and go to the 33-second mark. What, Rebecca?
Oh, were you searching also for evidences of the Book of Mormon during your 10-day trip?
No, I was just trying to have a good time. And I succeeded fantastically, I must say.
All right, I think this will work now.
Well, I'm here at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre here in London. Well, actually, this isn't the original Globe. Sadly, that one burned to the ground in the 1600s. But this 1997 version is a pretty true to history reconstruction of the original playhouse, where Sir Willie's great works like Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, etc. were performed.
Yeah, I think that was during a performance of Henry VIII, and there was fireworks or cannons or something. Something got caught in the thatch at the top, and a few hours later, there was no more Globe Theater. However, we've got Sir Willie. I've got a couple of pictures that I took. Oh, hey, wait, look, that looks like the same bridge that he is. By the way, anybody want to take a stab at what bridge that is?
Is that London Bridge? London Bridge is falling down.
Isn't that in Vegas?
I think it is. Everybody makes the mistake. In fact, I had to learn that early on from the guides, the tours.
Is it the
right?
Tower Bridge? Isn't
it is the Tower Bridge, Rebecca? Yes, Rebecca gets it correct. That is the Tower Bridge. I think London Bridge is one more upstream, and it's nowhere near as fancy. But that is Tower Bridge. So we just got to see that. Let me go ahead and I can move these, I think, these slides. Hey, wait. There's Big Ben. And Big Ben is not the name of the tower. It's the name of the clock. And I can't remember the name of the tower. Sorry. But it's this beautiful, beautiful tower with a beautiful, beautiful clock that everybody knows. And it's at that end of, what is it? It is Winchester Cathedral, I think. Okay, now I'm not a registered tour guide. So if I get any of this wrong, please. There I am. And what's in the background?
That's the secondary Globe Theater.
Globe. There
It is the Globe. Oh my gosh, there's a Globe Theater. Wait a
Oh.
second. There's that mural that they show
That's
too.
a good
And
one.
I had to sneak in. I totally photobombed Marvelous Works episode.
It would have been cool if you and Scott were there at the same time.
I think that it was a little bit colder when he was there. And I was in April. It was plenty cold enough. It was chilly. But I think there was snow on the ground, at least up in the north of England. You'll see it later on with windy. And let's see here. What is this next part now, Bill? Can we get into where we
Yeah,
started?
this would be,
originally?
yes, this will be the video. So give me 2 seconds here and we'll switch over.
That is all Bill needs. He just needs 2 seconds to work his miracles of technology.
All right. So here's the first video clip outside of just the.
Now pay attention to this, okay? This is really, really important. Is this about, okay, just go ahead and play it and we'll talk about it.
But why on earth are we starting our episode here? What on earth does Shakespeare have to do with the Book of Mormon? Well, nothing really, except one thing. In a previous episode, we've explored internal evidences for the Book of Mormon, specifically literary elements that stand out in the text and provide clues as to the book's ancient origins. There's so many different literary evidences, however, that we just couldn't fit them all in that one episode. In fact, when our editor Noah sat down and tried to cut all of the footage, it was over 3 hours long. So we chopped it up to make 2 episodes. So that's why I'm here, because Shakespeare is considered by many to be a literary genius, obviously. He employed the English language to a degree that was unparalleled at that time. And here's the cool part. Of all the rhetorical and literary tools on his tool belt, one of them was chiasmus. Now, I know if you've been watching, you know that chiasmus is a literary structure that we also find in abundance in the Book of Mormon.
Okay, so this is amazing to me. By the way, 2 of those 3 hours was Rabbi Joe.
Can I just
Right.
say,
We
Rabbi
know
Joe?
that much, don't we?
Can I
I'm
just
sorry,
say,
what did
Rabbi?
you know?
Yeah, Rabbi. They showed a picture of Rabbi Joe while they're talking about evidence for the Book of Mormon. I just want to note that Rabbi Joe came onto our show and acknowledged that he doesn't want to say whether it was intentional or malicious, but that he wasn't represented fairly, and he wasn't trying to say that the Book of Mormon is an ancient text.
Yes, thank you for bringing us up to speed on that, because I know not everybody watches the show can watch it every week. So I'm glad you added that, Bill.
Yeah.
But this is the amazing thing. This is a quote from Scott Christopher and the good people at Scripture Central. Shakespeare and the Book of Mormon both use chiasmus. Now, that is an amazing admission to make. Prior to talking with John Welch, which they're going to do down in the basement of the restricted area at BYU in the library, the place that, you know, you and I can't go to, but Scott Christopher can, as long as he keeps his hands to himself and just talks to, you know, John Welch. But Shakespeare and the Book of Mormon both use chiasmus. Now, this lends itself to some different possible conclusions. Here, let me go ahead. I'll try and do this, okay? Oh, nope, not yet. But that's the important thing right now, okay? He's going to add a few more things to, a few more weights to his belt before he throws himself into the Thames River.
So, yeah, we've talked about chiasmus before, a literary device that's been used for centuries by writers like Shakespeare to emphasize key points of their message and to create a lyrical structure that adds beauty and sophistication to their text. This was certainly Shakespeare's purpose in using it in the English language to create drama and to fill his wonderful playhouse with spectators. But even before Shakespeare's time, chiasmus was employed by authors of the Bible. It's found in the writings of Matthew, James, Paul, in the Old Testament too, in Genesis. Chiasmus is ancient.
Dr. Seuss.
It served multiple purposes for biblical prophets, and they weren't concerned with filling playhouses, but with focusing readers on a central message.
There he goes. Okay, so chiasmus is a literary device that's been used for centuries by writers like Shakespeare. So it's not just Shakespeare, it's been used by other writers for centuries. But of course, he adds and he finally gets to the main point, which is it was used anciently by Hebrew writers. And of course, we also know it occurs in the Book of Mormon. So this is why I went on to their YouTube channel, and I made the comment after this came out. And then I posted the whole thing on my Facebook page. And under my words are Scripture Central says chiasmus appears in Shakespeare's plays. And then I made the comment below. So Shakespeare wrote the Book of Mormon. I can't believe that they are saying this. I mean, a good apologist would not say this, because what he's done is he has taken his argument out at the knees before he's even made it. So if there's chiasmus in Shakespeare, and there's chiasmus in the Book of Mormon, and the ancient Hebrews wrote in chiasmus, they use chiasmus as well. Now I think we're to the place. Yes. So here we have a few conclusions. If ancient Hebrews use chiasmus, and if chiasmus appears in the Book of Mormon, and if chiasmus appears in Shakespeare, then number one, we could conclude that ancient Hebrews wrote the Book of Mormon. We could also conclude, number two, ancient Hebrews wrote Shakespeare's plays, or three, Shakespeare wrote the Book of Mormon. And each of those conclusions, based upon the evidence that they are presenting to us as the audience, are equally as valid.
Can I just say, RFM, because I don't want them to misconstrue you. When you went and put this comment up, it's easy for a believer or for Book of Mormon Central to go, oh, that's ridiculous. We weren't saying Shakespeare made the Book of Mormon. No, what you said was that somebody other than an ancient Hebrew culture used chiasmus. Hence, anytime chiasmus shows up, it doesn't have to be an ancient Hebrew culture that wrote it. That's, like you said, they cut their argument off at the knees before they even got started.
Yeah, this argument and some others that are occurring in this film are like watching a really bad magician perform some magic tricks. And this magician doesn't know his angles. The entire audience can see what he's doing. And he gets done with his trick, and he's shocked that nobody's amazed. Well, that's because he's shown everybody how to do the trick. And announcing at the very beginning that Shakespeare used chiasmus in his plays is the equivalent of accidentally showing the rabbit in your hat before you produce it from an empty hat.
Yeah.
I think it was shock and awe. When you say Shakespeare, everyone knows who Shakespeare is. They may not know some of the other authors. And if you can somehow use Shakespeare in the Book of Mormon in one sentence, shock and awe, really exciting. And you don't have to necessarily think logically about it.
Yeah, in the last one that we covered, they did the same thing with Cervantes.
Yeah.
You know, it has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon, but we're in Spain looking at the olive groves, so olive orchards, whatever the heck it is. You know, I've read the Book of Mormon too many times to keep it straight in my head. That's my problem. So let's go ahead and let's see what goes on next after having made that point. Okay, now I'm just going to give you a down and dirty way of responding to the evidence that the Book of Mormon is true or ancient or written by ancient Hebrews because there's chiasmus in it. This book is called Language of the Lord, New Discoveries of Chiasma. Chiasma, that's plural for chiasmus. Chiasma, New Discoveries of Chiasma in the Doctrine and Covenants by H. Clay Gorton. And over here on the side is just an example, okay? It's not even from the book. I just grabbed it off the internet. And that's section 1 of the Doctrine and Covenants and how it lays out as a chiastic structure. So, without knowing anything else about chiasm, without knowing what you go through in order to create it, even though we know it has the inverted structure like the X, the Greek letter chi, C-H-I, after which it's named, it's in and it's all over the Doctrine and Covenants. This guy wrote a whole book about it in 1993. So, If the argument is that the Book of Mormon was written by ancient Jews because there's chiasmus in the Book of Mormon and ancient Jews in the Bible use chiasmus, then the fact that there's chiasmus in the Doctrine and Covenants must mean that the Doctrine and Covenants was written by ancient Jews as well. That's the problem, and this is why this is the silver bullet on the apologetic trying to prove the Book of Mormon true, because it has chiasmus in it. If that proves the Book of Mormon true in that it was written by ancient Jews, then you have to say the same thing about the Doctrine and Covenants. If you say something different about the Doctrine and Covenants, then you have no logical basis to not apply your rationale for it showing up in the Doctrine and Covenants to the Book of Mormon as well. Any thoughts?
I just know that you and I, Rebecca, we would have seen through that logic the moment we thought in our brain that this was the way to present it. We would have noticed immediately that we're claiming one thing. The Book of Mormon having chiasmus in it is evidence of it being an ancient text. And then we would notice that the next two things we claimed were that something other than ancient Hebrews use chiasmus in their text. Hence, our argument is irrational and uses faulty logic. How they didn't see that, or how they ignored it, or how they thought our audience is stupid enough that we could present it anyway and they'll fall for it regardless because they're going to feel elevation emotion and they're just going to move through the video feeling good. That even says something worse about them. So they're either stupid or malicious, and either of those sort of get in the way of them presenting an actual credible argument.
Rebecca?
Well, it's a very selective use of the evidence, isn't it? Because as you point out, it applies to many different things, but they are trying to make that straight line connection. It can only be valuable to us to learn if it is, the basis of the Book of Mormon. And of course, this entire video, and you'll see as we show clips, is highlighted when you talk about elevated emotion with this music. When there's a point that they think they've made, the music swells, it gets very dramatic, but there's always this underscore. So it's based a lot on feelings, surprisingly.
And can I just add, RFM?
Please.
Dan Vogel just made a comment about they're using it for a different purpose. They're trying to make the Book of Mormon sound like it's really an incredible text. That's the connection. But it reminds me of when Don Bradley and Mark Ashurst McGee come up with this really cool thing about the Kinderhook plates and how they're being translated using the symbols from the Book of Abraham papyri and the Egyptian alphabet and grammar document. But what they ended up doing was cutting the long scroll and catalyst theory at the knees as well. They sort of don't realize, apologists seem to never grasp the permutations when they start to think on the run and work out their argument, and they are often then cutting down other arguments that they're trying to make.
Yeah, well, the Book of Mormon really is a lot like Shakespeare's writing. My favorite part in the Book of Mormon is when it says, Helaman, Helaman, wherefore art thou Helaman? Deny thy father and refuse thy name. You like that part too?
It's a favorite. There is a lot of sword play in both, right? Metal swords, Mesoamerica, and Shakespeare's work.
And it actually belongs in Shakespeare.
Exactly.
It's not not an
anachronism there.
All right. Now, this is all you need to know. I'll keep coming back to this maybe 3 times to this slide just to really, really drill this home. This is all you need to know in order to refute this argument. I mean, they already refuted it, but maybe the person you're talking to isn't going to be so nice as to mention Shakespeare. Okay, so where else is there chiasmus? Well, James Strang is an individual that most people in our audience know. He started a splinter group of Mormonism. After Joseph Smith died, he claimed to have a letter from Joseph Smith, since proven to be a fraud, but not at the time when he's saying Joseph Smith designated me to be the new leader, the new prophet. He moved a group of people up to Beaver Island in one of those states that probably starts with an M. Is it Michigan? I'm guessing. Anyway, it's up there somewhere.
Beaver Island, right? It was off Michigan.
Beaver Island, yeah, I think so. But he ends up producing a text which he claims to have dictated in a similar way to Joseph Smith, because he's going to replicate what Joseph Smith did because he's the new prophet, the new Joseph Smith. Strangely, there's chiasmus in this book that he creates. It's called the Book of the Law of the Lord. And this is one aspect of chiasmus in it, okay? Now, I'm not going to read through all of these, all right? But this is a real problem. I mean, it's not a problem if you're, a Strangite. If you're a Strangite, this is great news because this proves that this is true, just like the Book of Mormon is true. And it was actually somehow dictated or written down originally or came through ancient Hebrews. And there's another example of that here. This is from the first two paragraphs of a different record translated by James Strang in 1845, usually called the Vori plates. And there's another chiasmus in it. So the problem here, and this is something that was very disappointing for me when I finally realized it. As an apologist, I tried to stay away from this as long as I could, but finally I felt like I actually had to look at the thing and see if it really did have chiasmus in it. And I looked at it and the chiasmus was there, and I just went, okay, well, chiasmus is dead now as an argument for the Book of Mormon. Because, say it for me now, everybody together, if chiasmus in the Book of Mormon proves that it was written anciently by Hebrews, then it has to mean the same thing in James Strang's The Book of the Law of the Lord. And if it doesn't, then you can't use it to prove the Book of Mormon. It's that simple. I'm going to go through a couple of other examples here kind of quickly. We'll get to another clip from the show. Solomon Spaulding, in his manuscript, the one that we have, that we actually, know about and have and can read. Yeah, chiasmus in it. Manuscript found. Boom, it's right there. Here's Joseph Smith's diary from April 1st, 1834. Look, it's a chiasmus. These things happen when people are writing, when people are speaking. Here's John Taylor. I think this is from his book, Mediation and Atonement. By the way, both this and the last one were from Brent Metcalf's Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought article, and it has the citation there. Thanks so much for that, Brent. I hope you're watching, and I hope you're doing great. Okay, so the next one, this is all you need to know. That's why I wrote that underneath it. The fact that there's chiasmus in the Doctrine and Covenants is all you need to know. You don't have to remember all these other things. That's just there for entertainment purposes. And now we're to another clip.
Can I just say, too, before we go to it, one of the arguments that I've heard apologists make before is it's not just an ancient Hebrew writing style, it's the way God communicates with his prophets. But that argument is also cut at the knees, not only by finding it in Shakespeare, and okay, God works through Shakespeare, that's fine. But the moment you admit that God is working through James Strang, you have cut off LDS authority claims. They don't have any. You'd have to immediately go the most recent chiasmus in any Mormon sect is, and wherever you find it, you have to leave the LDS church and go there. And since Strang's comes later, I guess you have to join the Strangite church. It just doesn't prove what they want it to prove.
Yeah, I've heard that argument too. This is the voice of the Lord. Okay, well, if it's the voice of the Lord, it doesn't do anything to proving the Book of Mormon is ancient. It doesn't connect it with ancient Jews and their writing patterns. So if you want to go there, I understand why you go there, because you're kind of got to go there once you're faced with the evidence, but it doesn't help.
No.
Rebecca.
Yeah, I would say that also it's the natural language of the sermon of the day. I would say even sermons today, it's naturally how people speak when they're trying to orate, right? They're an exhorter, and it's just a natural pattern of speech where you get to a point and then you turn it around. I would say it's more just a human way of communicating, and that's why we find it so many places.
I think you're right. All right, ready for the next clip?
Here we go.
There's a lot of cool things I know we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely.
We kind of scratched the surface a little bit about the poetry of chiasmus and things like that. And I know people are excited to hear more. What are some of your favorite examples of chiasmus, specifically in the Book of Mormon?
My favorite, I think, would be Alma chapter 36. And what he tells there is the story of his conversion,
Right.
where he goes through a series of steps and he wants to change, but there's one important step there. And it's when he remembered the Son of God who would atone for the sins of the world.
Okay, so there you go. He's talking with John Welch. I didn't introduce it. I sort of did. He's down there at BYU in the restricted area Talk with John Welch. By the way, you notice something that they flash back to the second episode of this series when they talk with John Welch briefly, or maybe it was the first one anyway. It was the first one. Did you notice anything unusual?
Mm-mm.
John Welch is wearing the exact same clothes, which tells me that they filmed it at the same time.
Right.
Well,
Either
didn't
that or
he
he has
say,
a limited wardrobe, or it's a big coincidence. I don't know. Okay.
didn't they say that they had hours and hours on the cutting room floor and they had to gather them all up again and put them together in this episode? So I'm
Sounds
guessing
like they're
that's what
running
it
out of
was.
materials. What I
Yes.
think is happening.
I know. Now, notice that. That's something that Bill had mentioned. I think he was the first person who mentioned it to me, and I thought it was a good observation. We are 3 episodes in. Now, I don't count the Easter episode, only because they weren't even trying to present any evidence. It was sort of a fluff piece. And this is the 3rd episode. And that's why it's our 3rd response video. We didn't talk about the Easter video. But this one, yeah. And the fact is that they have 3 episodes out where they're trying to do evidence, and they got so much evidence, it's just everywhere. So why is it they're talking to Jack Welch in the 1st episode about chiasmus, and now they're talking to him again about chiasmus? Because there's just so much evidence, we have to repeat ourselves. I have this slide next after it, because once again, this is all you need to know. Bill didn't go backward. I have this same slide in here. This is all you need to know. It's in the Doctrine and Covenants. Completely undercuts any chiasmus that may or may not be found in the Book of Mormon. And Shakespeare, as well, was already mentioned at the beginning of this very video. So it's like we're going to talk to Jack Welch, the guy who discovered chiasmus. He's done a lot of writing about it in the book, chiasmus in the Book of Mormon, by the way. He's done a lot of writing about it, a lot of presentation about it. He knows stuff, but they just totally destroyed him before he even gets on scene by mentioning that Shakespeare used chiasmus, rendering this part of the video completely meaningless. All right. So,
I just want to note here, Dan Vogel said, did you see how spread out and edited the chiasmus was? When they showed the screen of Alma 36, they pulled the words from a small subsection of the text and then put them over on the side to show you it. There is lots of things said that don't fit into the structure that are left off because they don't fit.
And this is why finding a chiasmus, especially an elaborate chiasmus, is often, it's more creative writing than it is a science. There's a lot of creativity that goes into it. Can you find it? And John Welch did, but a lot of 80% actually, 80% of the text of Alma 36 doesn't fit into his chiasmus. And that is seen by some people as a problem, including Earl M. Vanderlei. No, I think it's Wunderly. He wrote an article called Critique of Alma 36 as an Extended Chiasm. This was, I believe, this is in Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought. It's from a number of years ago. And I'm just over here on the right side. And just this one paragraph from his article, there is much to challenge in this chiasm, including the unexplained asymmetry of element I. And that little apostrophe means it's the I coming back. Okay, you got I coming down along with all the other letters. So then you come back and they have little apostrophes so you can see which ones correspond. Well, I is out of order coming back. So that's what he means there. One has only to highlight these 34 elements in Alma 36 to see how much text, more than 80% of it, Welch has ignored in constructing his chiasm. Alma 36 is full of repetitious language, and the language Welch selects for an element is often only one of 2 or more occurrences of the same term or phrase. I'm just going to say that again. Welch selects for an element is, okay, it's full of repetitious language. So you got the same word repeated over and over. Welch selects the one out of those repeated phrases that fits into his structure. Okay, that's what he's saying.
Some of them aren't in the right order, and in those instances, he ignores them.
Right, because they don't fit.
Right.
Selected language and ignored language often work together to create false symmetry. Some paired elements are imbalanced in size, and some are creatively labeled to convey precision. Creatively labeled to convey precision. It's true. Nearly all of the paired elements have these or other problems. And then he goes, the following 9 are illustrative, and then he goes on with his paper, which you can read if you want to find it. It's on the internet. That's where I found it. Yes, definitely. Some paired elements are imbalanced in size. I'm not going to get off on a whole tangent on this, but actually a number of years ago, I was in communication with John Welch, and I came up with a way to help him with that in one instance. I don't know that it's reflected in this particular permutation of the chiastic structure that he's created for Alma 36, but I was able to help. Here's what it was, okay? Going down, there are several mentions of angels. This angel said this angel said that, this angel said that. It's all the angel, that is appearing to Alma, striking him down, and there's 3 mentions of the same angel. Coming back, I believe it is, if memory serves. You don't have 3 different mentions of angels, but you do have the verse that says that I thought I saw, as Father Lehi saw, God sitting upon his throne and surrounded by numberless concourses of angels. So I suggested that the numberless concourses, the angels in the plural coming back, could offset the 3 mentions of the angel coming down.
Oh, 3 mentions of angel singular is a plural, a mention of angels.
Exactly. See, you can do this too.
So
you can find these.
creative.
Hey,
Seems
knock it
like a
off there.
stretch. It just seems like a
love it.
little bit of a stretch, if I can say that.
Rebecca,
Okay.
It's a literary cherry picking, right? There must be a chiasmus. You've got to find it. It has to be there.
Yeah.
So you're just going to use some literary cherry picking.
Our
Rebecca,
job is
this
to
guy
find-
between us has been credited so many times in Mormon apologetics currently. Like it's
Yeah.
sort of crazy that you have someone who's shining a light on the truth, which isn't helpful to the Mormon argument, and yet he is credited in various locations in Mormon apologetics.
Oh, he's all over Book of Mormon Central. I looked up and I'm like, oh my God, it's still all there. It's amazing.
I think that it has been said, and I think it's true, that Book of Mormon Central is the new farms.
Mhm.
Yeah. Of course.
If that makes any sense. And I'm not going to go into the history of farms and how it became the Neil A. Maxwell Institute, subsumed under BYU, blah, blah, blah.
3
But I think
million
this
in
is-
donations last year.
Yeah, he's doing good. He's doing really good. He's a good guy, and he's a nice man, and he is, I have a lot of respect for him. Speaking of John Welch. Okay, so ready?
Mhm.
Oh, I think we have another clip.
So we put our team in touch with a Jewish professor who could illuminate the topic further. Gary Rensburg is a professor of biblical studies, Hebrew language, and ancient Judaism here at Rutgers. He's also the author of numerous books and publications about Hebrew literature. We are on a trek, as you know, to kind of discover what we would consider evidences for the Book of Mormon. Now, I know that you know Dr. Jack Welch.
I do. I know Jack very well.
We were just talking to him recently about chiasmus, and I know you have a lot in common with Jack about chiasmus.
Okay, a few things that I wanted to mention about that. First off, they're talking with Professor, I think he's a professor at Rutgers, Gary, yeah, he is, Gary Rensburg. Rensburg is his name. He's Jewish, okay? So this is the second Jewish person they've gone to. First it's Rabbi Joe, now it's Gary Rensburg. And they're going to do the same thing with Gary Rensburg that they tried to do with Rabbi Joe and get him to say something that's going to sound really good for the Book of Mormon. And I got to tell you, we'll get to the clip, okay? I think Rabbi Joe did a better job at remaining reluctant and unwilling to give them the clip, the soundbite that it was that they wanted. And unfortunately, Gary Rensburg kind of stepped into the trap, much to the delight of Scott Christopher and everybody who was filming, I'm sure. However, he knows John Welch, okay? This isn't just somebody who has nothing to do with Mormonism. He's not a Mormon. He's Jewish, but he knows Jack Welch. He's known him for years, and so he's a friendly person, just like Rabbi Joe was, that they reached out to. Now, was there anything else about this that we should mention? Oh, yeah. I looked at Gary Rensburg, and then I went back to episode 2 of Marvelous Work, because remember Ruiz, the guy who owned the olive orchard. And I thought for a second, I couldn't remember him, but I thought, did they just take Ruiz and stick a mustache on him and have him play the part of this Hebrew professor? And then I went and I got both the pictures. I got them side by side. Nope, I don't think so. I don't think they did that. I think these really are 2 completely different people. Okay, so having said that, now if we can play this clip, I think this is where they get Professor Rinsberg to step in it.
Based on the chiastic structure,
Right.
right, alone, one can, and this was part of Jack Welch's incredible discovery, it would go a long way to establishing the LDS fundamental belief that this is a text from the world of ancient Israel.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. It's been an honor.
It's been such a pleasure. This was great.
Thanks.
By the way, that hand being held out by Scott Christopher means don't add anything to that.
That's right. That's it. You
Don't
got it.
modify what you just said, that you're done speaking and we're out of here, baby, because we got what we wanted and we are a dot on the horizon.
Or is he done speaking?
Oh, he might be. I will tell you that, as looking at this as I would have as a faithful TBM, I would have thought, Yahoo!
Yeah.
He said it, so it must be true. When I look at it now, which I think is a little more objectively, I can put on different hats. Faithful TBM, more objective. I see a lot of discomfort, body language on the part of Professor Rinsberg while he is making this statement. Did you notice that, Rebecca? You're nodding.
Yeah, no, I did notice that. He did look uncomfortable, just sort of. And did you notice the music? The music reminds me of Soaring from California Adventure at Disneyland, and it just gets more and more elevated. And then Scott goes, "Oh, thank you." It's so dramatic. Yeah, and I wonder if right away the professor knew what he had said. I'm not sure if he did or if he understood in the way that it would be used. But when I first watched the video, I was like, damn, they got him to say it. They couldn't, they couldn't do it with a Rabbi Joe, but this guy they did.
I know. And so, Rabbi Joe, I got to give you credit. You were more savvy than
Yeah.
Professor Rinsberg.
Yeah.
Now, something happened after that interview, and I was just thrilled and delighted that Mr. Real decided to take matters into his own hands. Can you tell us about that, Mr. Real?
Well, sort of like the episode you did, A Whale of a Tale. I often, when we're doing projects and somebody says something, I'm like, I don't really think that person believes that. I know it was sort of framed as them saying a thing, but I don't believe it. So I went looking for Gary Rensberg and I found him. So I emailed him at grens@rutgers.edu. You can follow up if you'd like. And here's what I told him. I said, question regarding your interview with Scott Christopher regarding Jack Welch and Chiasmus. And by the way, you noted this to me. Formal name is John Welch. He goes by Jack, hence why if the audience would have noticed that he is called Jack in spite of the name at the bottom saying John, it's that reason. But I said, Scott, in Book of Mormon Central, use your words to convey to the audience that you believe that the Book of Mormon's Chiasmus to be a solid evidence of it being an actual ancient text. I said 2 questions. Number 1, did they represent your words fairly? Do you see Chiasmus in the Book of Mormon as strong evidence of it being an ancient text? And number 2, if the answer is yes to the first question, why haven't you joined Mormonism? Right? So Gary Rensberg decided he would message me back. And he said, Dear Mr. Real, I actually never said that the presence of Chiasmus in the Book of Mormon serves as solid evidence of it being an actual ancient text. I understand if others wish to reach that conclusion, but it also is possible that the Book of Mormon simply used chiasmus within its 19th century context.
Whoa, stop right there. Stop right there.
Where's the music? I don't hear it after that. Where's the...
Well, one wonders if something like that ended up on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, and it does seem like his answer could have been placed in the context of, hey, we're looking for evidence. Is it possible that chiasmus is evidence? Would we expect to find chiasmus if it is an ancient text? And then they get the soundbite they want, just like they did with Rabbi Joe. And just like Rabbi Joe, Gary Rensberg is telling us, without being rude, that he was never intended to convey to an audience that he thinks the chiasmus in the Book of Mormon is solid evidence of it being an actual ancient text. And he even puts that sentence in quotes. He does not intend that meaning. And yet this is the kind of games, by the way, if you're a believer watching this because you wanted to go watch theirs or you've already seen theirs and you're now sitting here listening, I want you to understand that church apologists always pose the apologetics in a very carefully worded way, and they ignore always the evidence all around that also you deserve to hear, so that you can set all the evidence side by side and make an educated decision about what you'll believe and what you won't, what you'll devote your life to and what you won't. And I'm just telling you, with Rabbi Joe, he said it himself. Gary Rendsburg says it himself. Neither of them wanted to convey the way this was used in Book of Mormon Central's material.
And I was kidding, Bill. Go ahead and read the rest of it, because this Jewish individual, Professor Rendsburg, sounds a lot like Rabbi Joe in how he deals with his religion and how he wishes other people would express their religiosity as well.
Yeah, he continues. He says, I am respectful of all religious traditions, and all I can hope for or wish for is that each person can be a strong adherent to his or her religious tradition and be equally respectful of other traditions. There is no single path to divine. We each have our own. That is how I practice my Judaism, and that is how I wish others would practice their religion. Gary Rendsburg.
Fantastic. Good job, Bill. And good job to you, not just because you found this out, but for giving Professor Rendsburg the chance to actually represent how he feels to the audience, unfiltered by hard edits.
And I just want to note, I followed up here this morning because I got my response from him late yesterday. I followed up here this morning and messaged him and said, here's the actual soundbite. Did they represent you fairly? Because he is, the sentence in quotes is a little different than the words he uses. And so I wanted to essentially say, just once and for all, did they represent this fairly? Was this taken out of context? Or did you say this to mean it this way, the way they're using it? I haven't heard back, but if I do, I will respond at a future Mormonism Live, letting our audience know what that response was.
I expect John Welch is going to be getting a phone call.
Yeah, Rendsburg will probably getting a phone call, because remember, Rabbi Joe got a phone call when we put out the promo that we were going to interview Rabbi Joe. Suddenly, Book of Mormon Central made a phone call to him to have a conversation about that.
Yeah, I just meant that Gary's going to be calling Jack with a few words.
Yeah, something's going to happen, huh?
What the heck's going on? What
Right.
What are you doing? I don't know that that's the case. We'll look forward to having your return and report on his answer to that follow-up question of yours. But great job. Good investigative journalism, Mr. Real.
Yeah, you're welcome, my friend.
All right, so now we go to the next clip. Is this Dracula?
This is Dracula.
Really? Because the slide shouldn't be on there that says Dracula if the next one's Dracula.
Well, you know what? This might be. No, this is something else. This is one other video clip that I stuck in here that I just wanted folks to understand how far they overreached. I was showing you guys this one earlier.
Yes. Okay.
So
go
I'll
ahead.
play it really quick.
As
But
we
then we're going
found
to
in
Dracula.
our journeys, we come across people of faith. We come across people of scholastic backgrounds that understand literary evidences, and all arrows kind of point to the Book of Mormon being authentic.
All arrows. Now, this was the Read Moon section, so I do have this in the wrong place. But the idea that all arrows point to the Book of Mormon being an ancient text, that's lying. Anybody in apologetics knows there is a counter argument, and that some counter arguments have more weight than the faithful argument. And when you tell an audience that there are no counter arguments, there are no criticisms, all arrows point to the church being true, the Book of Mormon being an ancient text, you're deceiving people. That's not honest.
Yeah, well, if the only arrows you look at point toward the Book of Mormon being an ancient text, then I guess that's true.
Right.
I think it really is the preponderance of the evidence. Later on, he talks about adding logs to the fire of the truth of the Book of Mormon. So it's almost like if you throw enough mud on the wall of these evidences, something's going to stick, and it is going to be true. That seems to be the way they're operating.
These are Texas sharpshooter arrows.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do have to bring up the fact that this is not a weighing of the evidence. And that's what I used to think when I was an apologist. This is not a weighing of the evidence. This is not who has the better evidence. One anachronism in the Book of Mormon proves the entire thing is a fake. That is the standard that forensic evidence examiners, people who examine for a living in a profession, documents to see if they are really ancient. That is the standard that they use, because that's all you have to find. is one. If you find one, it doesn't counterbalance something else in the same document that seems to be authentic. You can have 99 things that seem to be authentic and one anachronism, and the one anachronism blows everything else out of the water. That's how it's done in the real world. So just wanted to once again mention that. And now we get to go to Dracula, where they bring up Dracula. And I know they want to bring up different writers and everything. This is at a little bit later. This isn't, I think we're done with Chiasmus. You'll be glad to know. But
Unless
Dracula has what?
Unless they're not, unless their next episode, we revisit Chiasmus for the third time.
Yes.
Yeah.
We revisit Chiasmus. But now they go to Dracula. And I really started thinking, really, you're going to bring up Dracula in a movie about the Book of Mormon? Because that has its own set of problems.
Whew. Well, isn't this lovely? I'm at Whitby Abbey up on the northeast coast of England, and it is suitably creepy. In fact, supposedly it was the place that inspired Bram Stoker to write his chilling classic, Dracula. And of course, you understand the clear connection between the Book of Mormon and Dracula. Let me tell you. Stop. Bram Stoker's novel Dracula is unique in that he chose to write it as though it were a true account. So the chapters, in fact, are a series of letters written in between different characters in the book, or journal entries, actually from 6 different characters.
Don't even say it. Okay, that's a problem, okay? Because first off, he says Dracula is unique in that it presents itself as a real story. Okay, first off, it's not unique in that regard. There's lots of things that present themselves as real stories that are fiction, one of which this entire movie by Marvelous Work is about, the Book of Mormon. But he says it's unique in the way it does it, and that it purports, by the way, everybody here knows Dracula. Lots of people have seen different versions of the movie Dracula. It's been made and remade so many times in comedies and serious and blah, blah, blah. If you actually read the book, what you will find is that the book Dracula is, as Scott Christopher admitted, presented as being a collection of different texts that have been found and assembled into one narrative. And these texts, whether they are journal entries, other diary entries, different letters back and forth between people, there's even a newspaper clipping that figures in it. But the way they're put together ends up telling the narrative story of Dracula, which is, by the way, very similar to what the Book of Mormon does. If we can go to the next, so Dracula is not unique in that regard. Actually, the Book of Mormon does it as well. And so again, it's like the Shakespeare thing. They're shooting themselves in the foot before they even start making the argument. Do we have the next slide there, Bill?
Is it the video there, or no? Is it this one?
Yeah. So there's my copy of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now, here's the table of contents on the right. By the way, published in 1897, so about 50 years after the Book of Mormon, or 67 years, I think would be the right math, after the Book of Mormon. So it's not at the same time, but then again, I'm sure Bram Stoker isn't the only person who did this. If you look at the first 4 chapters of Dracula, the first 4 chapters are Jonathan Harker's journal. By the way, those first 4 chapters of Dracula are among the most terrifying in English literature. After that, it becomes a lot less terrifying as far as I'm concerned. But those first 4 chapters, and Stephen King will back me up on this because I read where he said the same thing. These are terrifying. But then we get to chapter 5. What's chapter 5? Oh, it's a letter. From Miss Mina Murray to Miss Lucy Westenra. Then we go to a journal, not Jonathan Harker's journal, but Mina Murray's journal. Then a cutting from the Daily Graph, I think is what it says, like the Telegraph or something. 8 August, Mina Murray's journal, and then a letter from Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra. Then another letter from Dr. Seward to the Honorable Arthur Homewood. I think that, that's the Texan in the story. There's a Texan in the story, if you don't know that. Then Lucy Westenra's diary, 2 more from another diary, chapter from a different journal, then 4 from somebody's diary, 2 from a different diary, back to Dr. Seward's diary, Jonathan Harker's journal. It is a compilation of different writings that are put together to make up a narrative. So, what is the Book of Mormon? If you go on this graph all the way to the left, where it breaks down the Book of Mormon in its component parts, you've got the record of Lehi. That's Lehi's journal. Then it says plates of brass. Well, that's what they brought with them. That was like the Old Testament up to Jeremiah, right? And fortunately, it also had Zenos in it, even though the Old Testament doesn't, but go Zenos. Then we've got Benjamin's speech. We've got a speech by King Benjamin. That's also a component part of the Book of Mormon. It shows up in the first several chapters of Mosiah. You've got a record of Zenoth. That's his journal. That's his diary. Record of Alma. Records of sons of Mosiah. And now look at this. This is very interesting for those of you who may not have been paying attention in the war chapters in the last part of the Book of Alma, where we have several letters that are included verbatim in the text of the Book of Mormon to continue the narrative. There's an epistle from Helaman. There's an epistle with Pehoran and Moroni as well. So there's epistles, at least three epistles that are contained there, just like the letters in Dracula. Then you get to more journals, records of Nephi, record of the Jaredites, and then finally documents from Mormon. So you get documents that are put in there. Those are sermons as well, which apparently had been written down, or Moroni remembers them so well he can recall them verbatim and include them in Moroni. So what we see here is a compilation of documents, and whoever combined or compiled the Book of Mormon or created it, they did it in the same way as Dracula in order to give it verisimilitude and make it look like it really was something that happened, and that documents have come into my hands, and now I'm just going to relay what it is they say. Thoughts about that, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think this goes through the entire episode. It's like they say one thing, but it's actually showing less evidences of the Book of Mormon in what they say. So right here, they've presented the idea that an author, a single author, can create a work where you have journals and perhaps sermons, addresses, and newspaper clippings. Well, what does that tell you about the Book of Mormon? It just seems strange to me with the way the whole episode is put together. You find that in each section.
I know, it makes me think that there's somebody who's writing the script who is a subversive element and is trying to goof up the apologetics that are going on in this movie, and nobody caught it. It was like when Robin Williams was saying those off-the-cuff comments during Aladdin, right?
Mm,
Remember that one? You've seen that?
that's right.
Princess Jasmine, take off your clothes. And nobody caught it, right? And it makes it into the movie. And if you play your video now and you know where to look for it, you'll hear it. But I think it's like somebody did this, but I don't think that's really what's happening. I think that they think this is a good way to present the Book of Mormon, and they just don't realize what it is they're doing. What do you think, Bill?
What were the epistles written on?
Yeah, that's a question, isn't it?
We talked about that a couple of days ago. You brought it up. I assume, and maybe in prep for this or listening to that video, but we had talked about a future episode, which I think our audience will see. We'll put it together, talking about the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon and the brass plates that they had from Jerusalem, and maybe also like the Jaredite plates, essentially. And as we put that together, one of the things you brought up was that there are mentions in the Book of Mormon of letters being put into the plates, but the time that those letters were written were hundreds of years earlier, maybe even longer. And now we have to make an argument that those letters were then transcribed onto metal early on because paper wouldn't last. And there's just issue after issue after issue. The more these guys talk and the more words these guys say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's the end of my presentation. We're not even at an hour yet, so there's hope.
All right. I love it.
Let's see, 4 sections, an hour each. Oh, we'll be done around like 11 o'clock tonight. This will
Yeah,
be great.
11
I'm
midnight.
excited. So,
Rebecca
all right.
Moon, is that your
I
real
know
name?
that was just my placeholder. You don't have to show that. That was just to, say, here I am. So there we go. Okay. And I think I can do my slides, can't I here? So in the next section, Scott Christopher goes back across the pond and he ends up in Provo area at Moon's bookstore. Now I've been there many times. It's actually really cool. It's run by Reed Moon. It's sort of a ye old curiosity shop kind of a place. You can see from there, they have all kinds of, books and artifacts. They have Americana, movie memorabilia. They have, of course, church history that they've collected, all kinds of things. You can really spend hours in there looking around. And of course, in this case, we're going to be talking about, if you recognize the person on the very far right bottom of the slide, this is who we're going to be talking about. But I will tell a very quick, funny story about Moon's books. So my co-host on Mormonish and I were in there, and there was a very nice woman showing us around, showing us some different books there. And she said, here's this amazing book, and it's about temples in Mesoamerica and how Jesus visited. And it has all these evidences of Jesus in Mesoamerica, basically rock art and different pictures and tiles and things like that. So we, of course, thought right away, well, we're going to buy this book for who? Dr. John Lundwall. Of course, he's got to see this because it's full of all these evidences of Jesus Christ's visit to Mesoamerica. And she especially was very excited to show us this picture on the right, which she said was Jesus Christ. So we thought, okay, that's very interesting. So
I can tell that from here without my glasses on.
I know.
That's obviously Jesus. That's
It's
the
very
hat he wore to
inspiring.
all the parties.
So we run everything through the Dr. John Lundwall test, right? Because we don't know. So we bought him this book, and this is actually his book. He took a picture today for me because he knew I was coming on. And we said, John, here's this book about temples and temple worship and Jesus Christ in Mesoamerica. And here is an amazing picture of Christ. I mean, this woman full on said, here is Jesus Christ. He just started laughing. You know how he gets laughing, right? When it's just completely absurd. He goes, did she not notice the shrunken heads and skulls around his neck? And I'm like, I didn't really notice that either, but there they are. And then he said, did she not notice the lobster claws and the claws around his midsection? Exactly. And then he said, did she not notice the sharp blade on top of his head? This is the head hunting culture. So I don't know if we want to rethink Jesus or what, but I thought that was very funny.
Yes,
Right.
it is funny. If this were a Get Smart episode, I know that this person would be the craw.
The craw. That's right.
Not
Stuck in
craw,
my craw. Anyway, lots of really interesting books there. Some of them are not exactly what they seem to be. So, all right, let's go to our next slide and we'll play the first clip of Scott Christopher meeting with Reed Moon in the bookstore.
Now, I'm obviously on the trail of Book of Mormon things. We
have a full vault full of older copies of the Book of Mormon, and we have another vault filled with every first edition of the Book of Mormon in every language. When I travel the world and people find out that I have a bookshop in Utah, invariably the subject of first edition copies of the Book of Mormon comes up. And everybody worldwide knows the value, and everybody's looking for them because from books printed in the 19th century, it's like top 5.
Yeah.
It holds its own with some of the most important books printed.
And Books of Mormon here nearby that I could.
Actually, right.
I was going to say. Tell me something cool about one of these.
Well,
let me get these away
That's
from you.
not the actual book.
No, that's a protective clamshell. But as we open it up, you can see here is the book itself. Originally, 5,000 copies were printed.
Grandin, right?
Grandin Press. If we can go to the title page right here, and you can see 1830. Number one question, do we know who this book belonged to? And the answer is yes. The person who owned this book was very proud of it and boldly wrote their name in ink, not on the title page, but on the...
Is it going to be somebody cool?
Hopefully.
He already knows.
Hiram Smith.
Yeah, Hiram Smith. He's pretty cool. I seem to recall that name. And
so this is Hiram Smith's copy.
Yeah, there it is. Hiram Smith's copy that he is showing to Scott Christopher. So let's put the slides back up. So then Reed goes through the provenance of this book, which means a list of who has owned it through history so that you can know that the book is what it is. It belonged to who you say it belonged to. So the provenance of this book, he goes into then with Scott. And he says, of course, in 1830, Hiram owned this copy of the Book of Mormon and very proudly wrote his name. And there it is, the signature, Hiram Smith. There it is. Well, 2 years later, he sold the book for $1.25 to Reynolds Calhoun. They were counselors in a bishopric in Kirtland. And it is in Hiram's journal that he did sell this book to Reynolds Calhoun. So again, this is provenance from Hiram to Reynolds. Let's find out what happens next. So then it gets a little more complicated. In 1846, of course, the Saints leave Nauvoo. Reynolds Calhoun leaves. He heads to Utah, but his son, Pulaski, which is, I don't know the origin of that name, but it's really funny. Pulaski Calhoun, his father, Reynolds, gives him this Book of Mormon because Pulaski doesn't go west. I looked into him a little bit. He owned some saloons. He'd been excommunicated, rebaptized. He sounds like kind of a character. So he has the family Book of Mormon with the name Hiram in it. He writes his own name under Hiram, also belongs to Pulaski. So he moves to Missouri, and there he acquires a family of slaves with the last name of Bradshaw. So in 1863, of course, we have the Emancipation Proclamation, and Pulaski Calhoun frees the family, and he gives them, as a fabulous parting gift, this copy of the Book of Mormon. Who wouldn't? And so the family that year moves to Chicago, where they remain, and the generations unfold. And eventually the book ends up with his great granddaughter, Carol Lee Hicks, who possessed it. Now, in 1960, we're moved into the 20th century. In 1960, the family contacted a mission president in the area, Gerald G. Smith, trying to find out, what can we do with this Book of Mormon? We'd like to sell it. In this video, they say they kind of want to give it back to where its origins were, but they did just want to sell it. Finally reached out to Hiram Smith's grandson, who was President Joseph Fielding Smith, of course. And in 2004, the family finally sold the book, and it has changed hands twice since then. And here it is with Reed Moon. So from that, you can tell that you know every single person that has ever owned the book. And that's very important, as Reed explains it. Did you have something to say about that, Bill? I know we talked about that earlier, or did you not want to bring that up?
No. I'll bring it up. In fact, I want to put up here on the screen, in a different video, the Midnight Mormons sit down with Reed Moon, and you can look up that video if you just go on to Google or Bing and type in seer stones and look up Midnight Mormons. The title of the video is "We Still Have Seer Stones," featuring Reed Moon. And when I saw the thumbnail for this video, I thought, wait a minute, I've seen this thing before. So I played the video. This seer stone used to be in my possession when I worked for Family Pawn. RFM and I did an episode on Mark Hoffman, and we showed this seer stone. So I gave my friend and former employer, Chris Bloxham, a call. And I said, Chris, you didn't tell me you sold the seer stone. And he says, yeah, he laughed a little bit. He goes, I said, you sold it to Reed Moon, didn't you? And he goes, yeah. He goes, how'd you know? And so I told him about the video with Midnight Mormons. And the story behind this thing is fascinating. I would definitely encourage you to watch the video and go back and watch the Mark Hoffman video. There's a lot of good humor around this seer stone. Mark Hoffman made a fake seer stone, sold it off as a real one, and convinced the people that he sold it to. He created the provenance like he always did for his fakes. And the provenance was essentially, it was a early member of the church man who could see the gender of his children if he looked through the stone, like through the woman's womb or whatever. He could tell what gender the child was going to be.
It's a gender reveal party.
It is. The seer stone helps do it. Yes, this is how they did it. And here's the cool little tidbit. I said, Chris, how did this all happen? He goes, somebody calls me and tells me that Glenn Beck wants to buy my seer stone. And he said the person was conveying that because they thought the name power might discount the price. My friend is smarter than that. He said, the moment he mentioned Glenn Beck, I knew I could get top dollar for this, right? So he sells it to Glenn Beck, and then Glenn Beck works through Reed Moon to store his artifacts. Now, here's why this is interesting. In the video from A Marvelous Work, as Reed Moon is telling the story of its provenance, he ends by saying, then my friend had it, and then I had it.
Yeah.
And I'm just telling you folks, the likelihood is that that friend is none other than Glenn Beck.
Wow.
So, how much did your former boss, Chris Bloxham, sell this Mark Hoffman forged seer stone to Glenn Beck for?
I didn't ask that. I should have, but it was certainly for more than he bought it for.
Okay, follow-up question. This is from, we still have seer stones, and that's from the Psych Ward radio broadcast, right?
You've got it.
Is
Yep.
he presenting this as a Hoffman forgery, or is it a real deal?
He is presenting this as a Hoffman forgery, but you'll also remember, you mentioned this, RFM. We've covered Reed Moon in a little bit before when we did the Flora Woodworth gold watch episode.
It's the Watchman.
Because he's showing the watch as a relic, but he doesn't seem to understand that these watches were given out by Joseph Smith to the plural wives in a way to sort of, at least in Flora Woodworth's case, to sort of manipulate her into an intimate relationship. And we were noting that predators often use gifts to nudge vulnerable females into an intimate relationship. So Reed Moon's been on the podcast before.
There it is. And I will say that Mark Hoffman memorabilia is actually very valuable in its own right now.
Mhm.
There's some
Yes,
of
it
it in
is.
the Granite Mountain Vaults. My podcast did an episode on that, and it's actually worth something. So
Well, I could understand. I'm sorry. I could understand why the church would want to try and get his stuff off the market in some
Yes.
place
Yep.
where it's not going to be out there being,
Yep.
thought to be genuine.
I think that's what the vault is for, actually, to put everything away that might cause pause.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was also going to say this family really wanted to give this Book of Mormon back to the church because it took them 44 years to do
It
it.
took him 44 years to make sure the price was right. That's exactly what it was.
I hope they got more than $1.25.
I think they probably did. But yeah, the provenance is in place because they absolutely have it tracked all the way down. And of course, the woman, Carol, she wanted to include pictures of her family. So you'll see that in the bottom picture, there's the Book of Mormon. And with it, in that box that he shows Scott Christopher, are all the pictures of the people in her family that loved and cherished. She says they loved and cherished it. They were not LDS. This Book of Mormon through their lives. So let's look at this. I think this is the last clip from my section here.
But ultimately, at least I believe, the authenticity of the book is really found in the spiritual realm. Like you mentioned, you read it for yourself. You felt that it was true. What more evidence does a person need? In your opinion, do you think Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon himself? No. Why not?
Well, first of all, I've read it numerous times, and I have my own reasons for believing just the number of times I've read it, and I see what it takes for a book to stick around. And there are so many forgotten books.
I don't know what happened there.
If
Sorry.
Joseph Smith would have written it, it would have been long forgotten by now.
That's beautiful. Anyway, thank you so much for your time.
It's been fun.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There you go. And I do have 2 more slides. So the whole point of the provenance here is that if a book has staying power through the generations, that means it must be, I guess, true. So take me back to my next slide. I have 2 more just to finish up really quick. So I made a list of books that were published in the 1830s, like the Book of Mormon. All of them have staying power.
Mm-hmm.
You've got, I put the Fall of the House of Usher. It's that green book on the left. That's for you, RFM. I thought you'd like that. That's the first edition right there. We have Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and that's on the right. And these are books that I don't own first editions, but these books are all in my library. Of course, there are way more books that were published in the 1830s, but I thought I would choose ones that have staying power for me, that I still have in my library here at home.
That means Quasimodo really existed, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's really true. And the top one, of course, is Oliver Twist. So again, this idea, that the staying power of a book is what makes it true. And I disagree. I look at this next slide here. I believe that, as he said, the Book of Mormon, not lost to time, but propelled into the 21st century, is because it was the book of a high demand, high control religion. And I compare it to books by L. Ron Hubbard. Now, these books are 70 years old, and they are still, or maybe a little less. You have the technical journals, you have Dianetics, and you have another one on Scientology. And these books are extremely popular. You can find them everywhere. They're in print everywhere, in every single format. They have carried through the generations because a particular group has taken them as their foundational scripture. And so just a little note, Scientology claims 10 million members worldwide, with 11,000 Scientology churches, missions, and groups in 167 countries. The written and recorded spoken words of L. Ron Hubbard on the subject of Scientology collectively constitute the scripture of the religion. So just the idea that it has this staying power and that a group of people find it true does not make it any more true than L. Ron Hubbard's Dianetics. Any thoughts on that, RFM?
Yeah, I was going to say that that was a great insight that you had onto that, because when I think about it, Book of Mormon, let's look at View of the Hebrews. Okay. It's a similar book written at a similar time. And who talks about View of the Hebrews today? Who even knows about View of the Hebrews today? Nobody, except for us, except for Mormons, which means that the only reason that we know about it is because it is put forward as possibly having influence on the creation of the Book of Mormon. So if nobody outside of us knows about View of the Hebrews, then if the Book of Mormon were not promoted within a specific church as being scripture and given away, I think the vast majority of them are given away and not bought. They don't have to, in other words, they don't have to fight through on their own merit and be purchased by people who actually want to read it. Instead, it's purchased by the sucker members who buy them by the boxful, write their testimonies in them, and then hand them out when the church is shifting from one version to another in the 80s. And I was one of those suckers, by the way. So yeah, the Book of Mormon would be just as forgotten as View of the Hebrews would be if there were no Mormonism, if there were no church promoting it. Nobody would know about it. As many people would know about it as probably Athanasius Kircher's books.
Just sort of a chicken and an egg scenario. The church follows the book makes the church true. It's just completely circular. What do you think, Bill?
Well, he hit it on the head. The whole thing rests on the fact that you produce the things in large numbers and you give them out for free. It's your foundational scripture of your religion. Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science books are still sold. L. Ron Hubbard's works are still sold. The Quran still sold. The Bible still sold. The Bhagavad Gita still sold. Any religious text where the religion still exists, that book is going to be sold. And in Mormonism's case, they're handed out for free. You said the vast majority of them, and the vast majority of those are then thrown in the trash can. So
there you go. As Scott Christopher said, beautiful, right? That's how he ended that segment.
He was so excited. And by the way, notice that when he said beautiful to the guy he's pitching the soft pitches to, and he's knocking him out of the park because he's a fellow Mormon, you don't see this little, what do you call it? This little hand coming up and saying, okay, stop right there. Don't say anymore because we don't want you to change your answer.
Right. Don't go any further than that. We've got the soundbite we want.
That's it. We did it. All right. That's the end of my
partying
section.
that went on back at the hotel after that interview.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what Mr. Rensburg has to say over the course of the next week.
He seems like a really nice guy. He actually reminds me of my dad.
All right. So the next section here is on stylometry, and I'll try to play here a few video bites that sort of set up what it is that they're going to sort of demonstrate. So here's the first one.
Well, as the name says, stylometry means the measurement of style. And so if we take a look at the Book of Mormon, which claims to have various speakers over a 1,000-year period of time, we could look and see if they're the same or if they're different, because they should be different if the Book of Mormon was written by 82 different speakers rather than just one person, such as Joseph Smith.
Okay, so there's that. So stylometry is to do, with computers is essentially the way they do it. You take certain sorts of words, and he'll explain that in the next clip, but take certain sorts of words and study how each author in the Book of Mormon uses those words, some more significant in larger numbers and others in less so. Some have different vocabulary than the other. And you can sort of figure out, not with certainty, but you can sort of figure out an educated guess on how many authors there are in the Book of Mormon. Here's the next one.
I see. And how do you do that?
Well, what we look at are the grammatical words. These are called function words.
Okay.
These are the words that are prepositions, conjunctions, pronouns. these type of words that don't convey any meaning, but they are the words that speakers, writers use as scaffolding to construct their message.
And I'll just say here, there are lots of word analysis that have been done with the Book of Mormon, with other texts that have similarities to the Book of Mormon, such as the Late War or the First Book of Napoleon, for instance. And this is one way to get at the data, but it's not the only way. And in this way, they are going to claim that this arrives at a fact that there are numerous authors of the Book of Mormon, or at least highly suggestive that there are numerous authors for the Book of Mormon. And so here they explain, this one's a little longer. They explain with a 3D dimensional model, show you what it is that they're talking about. So here it is.
Well, let me give you this comparison between the Book of Mormon speakers and the speakers in the 19th century novels.
Oh, very good. Okay.
We're going to step into the world of Book of Mormon voices in virtual reality.
Oh, good.
Put on that headset,
Oh,
Scott.
yes, it
Here
looks
are the
just like Sarah
controllers.
Hemla. Okay, wow. So apparently you have to play video games to ascertain the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. That makes it easier for certain generations, to be sure.
What you see are spheres, and each of those spheres are the words of a speaker, either in the Book of Mormon or in the 19th century novels.
I'm seeing it. Okay.
So the biggest distinction is along that axis that separates the green spheres, the Book of Mormon, from the 19th century novels. Each of those colored spheres is one of the 19th century novelists. This one's Jane Austen, and we have her
Oh, it's blinking. Oh, okay.
Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility.
Yes, I love that movie.
And then we have Charles Dickens,
Which is,
Great Expectations,
okay, very good.
and Oliver Twist, James Fenimore Cooper, Last of the Mohicans,
Right.
and Deerslayer, and then
Great.
Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn
Is the,
by Mark Twain.
okay.
Now you'll see that each of the authors' spheres grouped together, well, they were created by the same mind, so that makes sense.
It does indeed. Yes.
But you can also see that the speakers, the characters within an author, are distinctly different from each other. Let's take a look at the Book of Mormon.
Okay, which is up here, the green
Those
stuff.
are the green ones.
Okay, I'll bring it down a
There's
little.
28 authors, as we mentioned, and they range from Abinadi to Zeniff. And you'll notice how far apart they spread from each other.
Okay, so who's we pointing at here?
The size of the sphere,
Is the amount of words?
amount of words that each one speaks. So
Nailed it.
Mormon speaks 97,000 words. He's the biggest speaker in the Book of Mormon. He has the biggest sphere.
It's the Book of Mormon after all.
Followed by Nephi, who has 28,000 words. Followed third by Alma the Younger, who has about 21,000 words.
He's awesome.
But look how they separate from each other.
Because they are, statistically speaking, on this plot,
They're
they are
different.
that different of a voice.
They are different.
Okay.
And so you'll notice now, most strikingly, however, in the entire display is the variation, the spread of those green spheres.
Yes, compared to the variation and spread of even the best literary artists of their day.
Exactly
Am
so.
I getting that right?
And so there's more variation in one book, the Book of Mormon, than in 8 novels written by geniuses of the times.
Wow.
Highly unlikely, as you said, for a farm boy, little education, living on the American frontier.
Really, 3, 4, 5, however many Ds we're talking about here, dimensions, is really the only way to kind of capture how truly cool the differences are from.
Well, there's 250 different dimensions that we use to describe their styles, and we projected it statistically down into 3 dimensions so that we can see it.
It's beautiful.
Okay, so
Wow, those Book of Mormon authors are almost as far apart as Blathers and Oliver.
yeah, and I wanted to start off with that point. You know, we've been talking, preparing for this episode, and they are, first off, point number 1, they self-acknowledge that single authors can change their tone, vocabulary, sentence structure, approach to writing as they transition from one voice within their book to another. And I think I didn't check all of them, but I checked two of the sources for the books that they gave. What they were trying to do was take two books from well-known, highly successful literary authors and books that their words all added together would be about the same length as the Book of Mormon. So we are comparable there. They're self-acknowledging that a single author, Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, that they have the ability within a book, when they have numerous characters, they have the ability to change up how that character speaks so as to distinguish it uniquely from any other character in the book. Number one. Number two is that the model they use for the Book of Mormon, it's not a book. So when they say Mormon, it's any time in the Book of Mormon that Mormon's speaking. There are certain authors who hardly say anything. 500 words, 540 words, 917 words. You had said to me today on the phone, that's not a large enough sample to do anything with. Now, again, some of these famous authors have the same situation, but they're on the very outskirts. They want to say this thing is so wide in scope. But notice the outside of that, those green dots are the smallest of the green dots. These are the authors in the Book of Mormon who hardly spoke at all. I spoke to somebody who has dealt with this research. We'll get into that here in a moment. And they said there's so few words spoken there that one sentence that's an anomaly would distort it to send it way off to the outside. And so you really can't count that. There are really, you pointed this out, our friend, there are really only 4 authors who have a significant enough amount of words said. And the same is true, by the way, for Dickens and Austen and the rest of them. There's only 4 authors in the Book of Mormon, alleged authors, who have enough words said that would give some sort of real stability to the results that we see here. So while they have the green dots spread out further, I do want to note the yellow dots, and again, it's a 3-dimensional model, so you can't just see it from one side and go, oh, that's so many inches wide or feet wide. You're also looking at it in depth as well. And Jane Austen, as an example, is got some depth to it in all directions. So it may not be quite as wide in one spot. And actually, if you take off the anomalies on the outside, you end up with it being almost identical to the width of Jane Austen's. I'll see if I've got that here. But let me say this here first. These are the amount of words each author has. So Lamoni's father has 541 words. Lamoni says 512 words. Korihor 680. Amaleki 919. And there's some other small ones in the middle too. Laman and Lemuel 669. So those aren't large enough to have a sample size that would give accuracy to what we're doing. It's nice to be able to show a picture of it and say, oh yeah, Lamoni's father is way over there and Amaleki is way over there and everybody else in the middle. But really Lamoni's father and Amaleki are such small sample sizes. They're sort of distorting the real picture.
Yeah, back when I was studying this back 40 years ago as an apologist, even then it was very much the standard. I don't know if it still is, but I don't know how it could be reduced that much, that basically you had to have 5,000 words sample from an author in order to have a statistically meaningful analysis of the non-contextual words that are used. And those 4 people that were done in the Book of Mormon, this is by the Mormons at BYU back in the day. But they were, Nephi, Alma the Younger, Mormon, and Moroni. That's it.
Yeah. Those
Even
are the
Jacob,
4.
who has his own freaking book, he doesn't have enough words. And so you've got these like Captain Moroni, 3,067. Get rid of him. He doesn't have enough. Helaman, they say 5,488. I don't know. Did he speak some more words in the last 40 years that got added to the Book of Mormon? It depends on how you count them. Enos, at least at the bottom there, 989. At least those are represented as being his own words. It's not enough for a sample. But Amaleki, is this from the letter that he wrote? I don't know. Look at Korihor over there at 680 on the right. We don't have anything written by Korihor. And somebody else had mentioned this in a comment that you put up on the screen. All we have, if the Book of Mormon is really what it purports to be, we have somebody else recapitulating their version of what it is. Yeah, there it is. LADRAC1. Don't know how to pronounce that, but this is a good point. They have Corey, Hoare, and Lemuel in there who aren't authors. Their words are represented by someone else. So there's all these problems that this has. And I think that you're right, Bill. They want to get a constellation of green globs that look so impressive that they're going to put in there people who aren't writers, people who are mischaracterized as having said these words, and also people who said not enough words in order to even be a part of this study. Because then you have a Malachi who shouldn't be in there, who's on the far left, and way over there on the far right is Lamoni's father. Yeah, that's the same problem.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be in here. And if you took all those things out, then you would have a few big balls. You'd have a few big globs, a few big green globs, 4, possibly 5, and they're all basically in the same neighborhood, kind of like the other ones down below.
And I would just like to go on record that I know Jane Austen is true. I reread every one of her books every year, and it is true and authentic. I feel the evidence. So, but actually, it's interesting. This is the evidence that I hear from other people almost more than anything else. The different voices, just in talking to faithful relatives and friends, this is what I hear. So it is very important, Bill, that you do go over this, because I think this is one of the things that they point to.
And Rebecca, what do you hear when Scott Christopher is introduced to the fact that some of these are Jane Austen? And he goes, "Oh, I love that. I love that movie."
I love that movie. Yes, I caught up to that. Yes,
I
he
don't think
did.
he's a big reader.
I don't think so either, which is probably why he's so wowed by this visual, right? He doesn't quite understand what it is, and he's really overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. I just want to note as we move forward, there are other problems here we're going to go into. I just want to note that the green dots aren't 26 times as big as Jane Austen's dots. They're not so much bigger that you go like, well, that's a book written by one person who has the ability to transition to multiple voices. And this is an ancient text with 26 actual different authors, and those dots are spread out in that way. It simply doesn't substantiate what they're saying. And now we'll go into sort of why that is. Charles Dickens, each character, again, has a different voice to them, and there are slight differences. In that slight difference, I don't know what gauges how far a dot is from another dot, but whatever difference in distances the 26 authors of the Book of Mormon are, you have to grant that you have to see Charles Dickens in the same light and recognize that there's a significant distance between some of his dots as well. He's able to take on the tone of various characters that he's writing about. And so here's another image that they use. It shows Twain and all of the various characters that he's got. I'll skip ahead here. Same thing with Jane Austen. Those are all the various characters. But, often in these works, you'll find groups of characters sort of lumped together. The differences aren't significant, and in other places they are. But lots of things can impact that. The sort of message that person's giving can impact that. If the person is on an errand to say something in the text that's very demonstrative, and someone else is a very soft person who's maybe experiencing melancholy or what, anything can impact the sort of things they're going to say and how they're going to say it. And it should be noted that it isn't just great literary authors that do this. It's going to be practically anybody who has multiple characters in a book. There would be differences. I want to note here, they're separating Twain's characters from the narrator in Twain's books. And you'll see why this is important in a moment. So he distinguishes, this was their study. This was the YouTube version of the BYU study that did this, that Book of Mormon Central is using. They separate Twain acting as a narrator in the book. So anytime the narrator is speaking versus when the characters are speaking, and the narrator is at distance away from the characters, but the narrator is much closer together to itself. And the characters are then closer to themselves, but the narrator and the character have two very different voices. And that shows up in every one of these authors. So we would expect a narrator voice and a character voice, even though it's the same author, to be at significant distance from each other in terms of having a unique author voice within the book. Again, I'm only getting one angle. I'm not saying that this is accurate, but by this angle, when I eliminated the anomalies, I end up with Charles Dickens, which was the yellow. And again, I counted the anomaly in the yellow. So I'm not playing fair here, but I'm just saying that you can play with this any way you want. And what you end up with is the Book of Mormon section of authors, the green dots aren't that much more spread out than, say, the yellow dots of Charles Dickens. Okay, now, I don't remember what the point was with that one, but I'll say this. Chris Johnson did a wonderful, I think every person who has questions about Mormonism or has left the church should watch Chris Johnson's video on YouTube, and I will put that in the show notes as soon as the show is over. You can go watch him, and he goes through about an hour and a half of laying out about 20 fantastic points that challenge Book of Mormon historicity. This particular slide he uses is to say they compared every like gray-blue dot that makes up this shaded area on the far left of that slide. Every dot is a book written at some point or another that they compared with the Book of Mormon. And the more to the left that the dot is, and the dots are so grouped together that it makes almost a solid color of gray there, gray-blue. Every dot represents a book, and the further to the left, the further away from being close to the Book of Mormon that book is. The books that are the closest to the Book of Mormon, in terms of how it's written, the Book of Abraham, the Book of Moses. In other words, whoever the author is of the Book of Abraham, whoever the author is of the Book of Moses, those are the closest books to the Book of Mormon, but those aren't Nephites or Lamanites. That's Moses talking, and that's Abraham talking. And this is a different study than this stylometry that they're doing here, but it's similar. And what it essentially pinpoints is whoever the author is of the Book of Mormon, the Book of Abraham, the Book of Moses, they are very close to each other. The other ones that are close, First Book of Napoleon, which we've mentioned here, Book of Commandments, Doctrine and Covenants, right? The Late War, which we've talked about here. I only use this to say there are other books that are closer to the Book of Mormon in some ways, and that the books that this stylometry research uses, they are very selective about which books they compared it to and which books they stayed away from showing. That also plays a huge factor. So if we were to do their study, but with these books that are the closest, including other pieces of Mormon sacred scripture, it might be interesting to see if the authorship of those is much more similar to, say, Joseph Smith. Now,
Hey, Bill,
please.
Bill, maybe
ahead.
I'm missing it. I don't see the Book of Mormon on this.
Yeah, the Book of Mormon is the baseline, so they don't show it, but it is the parallel line at the bottom. It is the flat line at the bottom. They're not showing it there, but yeah, anything that's sort of, let me get in front of my camera here.
So
Anything
I can
that
see
sort of
then why the
works
Book of
down.
Abraham and the Book of Moses are closest to it, because they're closest to that baseline.
Yes, the baseline at the bottom is the Book of Mormon. Anything that gets close to that is closer to the Book of Mormon than the books that are higher up. And I just want to say most books sort of stay off pretty far to that left. There's a few anomalies. Again, Late War, Book of Commandments, First Book of Napoleon, Book of Abraham, Book of Moses. So there's that.
Okay, so View of the Hebrews is very close to the Book of Mormon too, then. Is that right?
Where do we... Yes, View of the Hebrews is
it
not close, but closer than most books. Yes.
Okay, so that's not a line showing where it goes down to. That's actually the point.
Yeah, the dot. That's the dot that they're showing.
Okay.
So where the dot is. Yep. All right. Late War. We talked about that. I want to say too, because we try to be transparent and forthright, there are responses to what Chris Johnson showed there. If you want to read the other side of the issue, I would suggest going and reading Interpreter, Late War Against the Book of Mormon. Their publication is attempting to discredit Chris Johnson's work. And so if you want to hear all sides, I would suggest you do that. I think that's an important thing in this space, is to read the information on all sides and make as best as you can an educated, informed decision.
It looks like that's a new logo for the Interpreter. I just saw that recently. I don't know about you, but I see that and I'm thinking marijuana leaf.
Yeah, and I always find Mormons and their subgroups are always changing their logos and their vocabulary all the time, aren't they?
Yeah. It's historical. It's like changing the name of the church over and over so your creditors don't get you.
Fair Mormon, fair
Yep.
LDS. Yeah. Okay, so let me play another video. This, I think, is some of maybe, I'm hoping this is Chris Johnson's research here. So let's see if that's what it is.
There's various tests we can apply. And we can use has anybody heard of the Urantia text? It's kind of like the Book of Mormon.
And I just want to say one thing. Chris Johnson has a little bit of like his mouth is dry and he kind of clicks his lips together. I'm really sorry. It sort of shows up loud in the sound. I apologize for that. I'm sure he was nervous as heck when he was giving this talk, but they're essentially what they're about to go into is the Urantia text, which Mormonism would absolutely declare as just a false religious text or a false text claiming to be from interdimensional beings sharing end of world ideas. And when they do stylometry with the Urantia text, they find that it has multiple authors as well.
As opposed to an authentic text from 4 to 5 interdimensional beings.
Right.
Sounds real to me.
There's various tests we can apply. And we can use has anybody heard of the Urantia text? It's kind of like the Book of Mormon. The Urantia text is a mystery text that miraculously appeared somewhere between 1924 and 1955. There are approximately 4 to 5 interdimensional beings dictating the text. These are the people in the text. These beings have statistically distinct word patterns. So you can, by analyzing the word patterns between these 5 different beings, you can tell that there's 5 different beings speaking. But if it's a hoax, it would take multiple conspirators, making it more likely someone would eventually come forward with the truth. So what's going on with the Urantia text is basically the same problem we have with the Book of Mormon. They're trying to figure out, is it multiple authors or one author? They did a few analyses on it, and they found that there's distinct word patterns within it. Now, LDS scholars have done the same thing, and they found that Alma is distinct from Mosiah, Nephi is distinct from Moroni, and Moroni is distinct from Mormon. So there's a lot of evidence for the Book of Mormon in that sense. And I notice a lot on the forums and blogs, a lot of the LDS Latter-day Saints will say that this is significant and proof that the Book of Mormon is true. It also applies to the Urantia text. So what's going on? Do we have Sidney Rigdon writing one chapter and Joseph Smith writing another one and Solomon Spaulding writing another one? Well, there's something called stylistic drift. What if there was one author? What would we expect? With stylistic drift, the theory is that while you're dictating or writing a text, your conversation is changing through time. So what you're talking about at the beginning of the book is going to be different than what's at the end of the book. So you're slowly progressing and evolving through time, which means that with multiple authors, you'd see this one. With one author, you'd see the one on the right. So this is a good way to determine if it's multiple authors or one. And just as a side note, really a crazy side effect about this, nobody knew about stylistic drift when they did the Alma and Moroni and Mormon and Mosiah, when they're comparing all of the different parts of the Book of Mormon. Nobody really knew about that. It's fairly new. So this is what might happen if it were a single author. If you took one slice of the Book of Mormon here and one slice of the Book of Mormon here, the conversation is going to be significantly different because they're spaced in time because of stylistic drift, which means when you compare both of those together, they'll look like 2 unique voices. So they applied this. Christopher Smith actually applied this to the Urantia text. The Urantia text has one author, even though stylistic patterns show up as multiple authors. So using stylistic drift, you can determine that the Urantia text had one author, which makes sense from a conspiracy perspective, because conspiracies, the more people that are involved, the harder it is to keep their mouths shut. Stylistic drift does occur in the Book of Mormon in dictation order, and I don't have time to explain all of the details on that, but this is evidence that the Book of Mormon has one author. So who was the author? Solomon Spaulding was dead. Sidney Rigdon apparently, well, there's a lot of speculation. Here's Joseph Smith's own writing in 1829, about the same time as the Book of Mormon. We ran an analysis on this and compared it to the Book of Mormon to see if there's any similarities between Joseph Smith's own writing in 1829 to the Book of Mormon, which was written in 1829 and published in 1830. So here's what we found. All of those are 3-word matches that appear in the Book of Mormon. The darker orange is more significant. I can explain that a little bit more later, but those are, I'll explain right now. Millennium Falcon, I'll use this as an example. Millennium Falcon versus he is. Those are both 2 words, but one is more significant because it has more meaning, and the other one shows up everywhere. So certain types of phrases are more significant than others, and you have to account for that when you're weighting texts for analysis. Otherwise, you're going to get all sorts of noise in there. So you have to weight how significant each match is, which is a baseline. We need a baseline to compare against. We have one. So another interesting part about this is Joseph Smith, he wasn't a scholar. He wasn't very educated. So he has like a weird way of talking. But he is going to try. That is in the 1830 version of the Book of Mormon, but it's no longer in the Book of Mormon. Of course, that sounds silly. But that, to me, is fairly strong evidence that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon.
Okay, so that to me isn't significant enough, so I went further. I ended up finding, this is Christopher Smith. He shares some of the research that's been done in the past. He also shares that stylistic drift. Again, I don't think the dots are so close that you have to think that, but there certainly is a general direction in which those go. You'll notice the curve is strange at the beginning. I want to note they put this in the Mosiah priority order. In other words, the 116 pages are lost. Joseph picks up after that. Then when he gets to the end of the Book of Mormon, he begins translating, comes back to the small plates of Nephi and begins translating. So this, I couldn't say that the beginning of this is the small plates of Nephi and that explains the curve. No, that doesn't explain it. But the general direction of this is sort of neutral for a moment. And then there is suddenly some changing that happens. And it happens not perfectly, but generally speaking, it happens in order. And this is what we would expect from somebody who is little by little, their vocabulary, their style of dictating, because that's how the Book of Mormon happened, would shift or change over time. Or if they're reading a pre-written text, when that text was written, the author would shift over time. So there's that. Okay, then this is the big one. Folks out there, some of you will remember there was a neo-apologist who ran a blog called Church is True. He went by the name of Randall Bowen. That was his pseudonymous name. He used a fake picture because he was worried about retribution for being a neo-apologist. He didn't have complete literal belief, but absolutely faithful, absolutely pushed back against critics like me at the time. He ended up coming forward later and announced that he wasn't in fact Randall Bowen, he was in fact Rob Terry, and you can find Rob on Facebook today. I reached out to him because he did a fantastic job of researching this stylometry issue. And it's in a Wheat and Tares article, great blog, by the way. They allow a wide range of authors to post cool findings there. I've got a couple articles there. Randall Bowen, at the time that was the name he went under, has posted numerous times on Wheat and Tares. Great article. Book of Mormon word print analysis review. And there's a more current one. I wish I would have gotten that image, but I think it's Book of Mormon word print analysis review update 2020. This one was written, I think, in 2018. But so here was the church's study. So the three-dimensional model is all those green dots. This is a this is not a three-dimensional model. I want to say two-dimensional model, showing the same information, showing the various ones. And what Randall did was he reached out to BYU, I think, who did the study. I know he reached out to the source, and they gave him their computer program and database to be able to do this research on his own. And so what he did was he was able to replicate their studies. Now, they've got colored dots, and it's not perfect. So, for instance, Helaman is a little further away from Mormon there than he has Helaman from Mormon. But essentially, he's able to replicate their data. And what he discovers is that, and I'll just read what he says. Many years ago, based on my own reading of the text and confirmed when I looked at the Book of Mormon word print studies, I developed a theory that the Book of Mormon could be best analyzed by splitting up the narrative. I will call this the N voice. And so what he does is anytime someone in the Book of Mormon is speaking as a narrator, remember, if we go back to the earlier image, the Book of Mormon's central slide or presentation, the video, showed that they also agree that the narrator voice will be separate from the character voice, and they will have some distance from them. So he found the same thing in the Book of Mormon, that there was a narrator voice that was all through the Book of Mormon. And if you took that and said, I'm going to treat this as if it's a separate voice, and I'm going to put it over here on one side, and then I'm going to take he called it the sermon voice, portions in the splitting up the narrative, I will call this the N voice portions, and the sermon, I will call this the S voice portions. I split up the Book of Mormon verse by verse, S voice versus N voice. Here is a chart covering Mosiah and Alma, the first translated books in the Book of Mormon we have today, of the breakout by chapter of percentage, each of S and N. So even within a given chapter of the Book of Mormon, there will be moments where a narrator comes in and says things in the voice of the narrator, and then you'll have someone teaching or giving a sermon. And he was able to find that these were two very distinct voices. Not that it couldn't be one person, but that it wasn't 26 people. That at most this was 2 or 3 people. And so he shows the narrative voice in which chapters were primarily a sermon voice. And here's what he noted. And it's not just the narrator speaking as a narrator and the sermon voice is giving sermons. It's the entire vocabulary of each voice is different. But the narrator voices, all the authors who are speaking as a narrator, have extreme similarity to each other. And we'll show some examples. And the sermon authors have extremely overlapping vocabulary and the style in which they write. So the narrator voice is third person, past tense, frequently in passive voice, and when they had been cast into prison. Surprisingly low amount of religious terms and concepts. Use of unique vocabulary and phrases with 10 times more frequency than the S voice. Came to pass, possession of the, contend with, among the people round about, as many the borders. Preference for those over these, they succeeded with those others. Preference for God as the name of deity. They had an interesting vocabulary usage of some terms with up to 5 times more frequency than the S voice. Priest, commencement, wrath, caused, throughout, dissensions, mourning, determined, exceedingly, circumstances, astonishment, contention, wax, sorrowful, fine, silver, gold, affairs arose. Heavier usage compared to the S voice in common words like the, also, and, on, by, who, with, might. And it didn't matter if it was a narrator voice from Nephi. It didn't matter if it was a narrator voice from Mormon or Moroni. The narrator voice carried these similarities from author to author to the point where it showed up in the data as if this was one voice. S sermon voice characteristics. Use of the first person present tense, and behold, I say unto you. Use of Bible, formal language, shall, ye, hath, doth, ye shall prosper in the land. Again, narrator voice doesn't use Bible language, at least not as much. Religious content, especially doctrinal exposition related to the atonement of Jesus Christ. Frequent use of common words. If, for, not, no, even things, this. Frequent use of rhetorical questions to illustrate doctrinal teachings. Common use of ye shall, for behold, I say unto you. Preference for Lord as the name of deity. use of unique vocabulary and phrases completely missing from the 62,747 word sampling of the narrator voice, such as state of, that which is, this land. Use of unique vocabulary and phrases with 10 times more frequency than the invoice, somewhat, saved, and if, Lord God, face of the earth. Common frequency of unique sounding 19th century Protestant phrases like reason to rejoice, song of redeeming love, temporally and spiritually. Okay, next. Now, he showed that there are these two distinct voices of the narrator and the sermon voice, but also that there shows up late in the Book of Mormon. If we put it in dictation order, so we have Mosiah priority, so everything after the small plates of Nephi, after the 160, after Nephi fills in the gap left by the missing 116 pages, take that and put it at the end, because that's the last part of the Book of Mormon to be dictated. And what you end up with is that around Moroni, maybe just a touch before, there seems to be, and it's a little more ambiguous than the other two voices, there seems to be a late voice that comes in around Moroni and carries through, getting stronger through the small plates of Nephi. And he just notes it's an increase of narrator speaking in the first person. Mormon rarely does this from Mosiah to Alma, but then starts to do it more often. Moroni does it frequently, and Nephi does it exclusively. More fluidly changing from narrator to sermon compared to primarily large blocks at the time in the first half. In other words, it becomes easier for whoever the author or authors are of the Book of Mormon to sort of switch in and out of narrator and sermon voice. As you get towards the end of the book, the project is ending. If you believe the Book of Mormon is not an ancient text, that's explained by an author who's getting more comfortable doing this project. Increase in vocabulary and topics related to House of Israel, Jews, Gentiles. Increase in some random phrases, by the power, face of the land, like unto. Increase in vocabulary and topics related to the Book of Mormon writing process itself, plates, writing, etc. Decrease in using some of the peculiar words and phrases strong in the first half, thus took over the people. Change in usage of common words and prepositions. Okay. So he gives examples here. I'll leave this up on the screen. You can pause it. You can read these, but this is Mosiah chapter 15, verse 9, where Abinadi is speaking. This is Alma 34:16, where Amulek is speaking. This is Alma 42:15, where Alma is speaking. Three different Book of Mormon authors, and they sound the way, not just the one common phrase there. When you read it, their speech is almost, you can sort of sense like this feels like the same person who's writing these three verses. And then here you have the narrator voice. This is Mosiah chapter 9, verse 11. This is Zenith who's narrating. This is Alma 62:48. This is Mormon narrating. And this is Ether 7:19. This is Moroni narrating. Again, not just the common phrase, but what you'll notice is these three sound entirely different from the ones we just read, but they sound very much like each other. Now, think about this. This is a strange thing. Why would all the narrators in the Book of Mormon sound extremely similar and all the sermon voices sound extremely similar? Well, when you look at what they positioned earlier in the video, they acknowledge that single authors do the same thing. Their narrator voice is different than their character voice, or as this would say, sermon voice, but that the narrator is very similar to each other and the characters are similar to each other in comparison to the narrator. Okay. Concluding explanation. So Randall Bowen / Rob Terry, here's what he said. This was what, when he looked at the data, this is what he came up with. He said, number one, there was a pre-existing consistent text of S and N. He's suggesting that one possibility here is that there's an existing text. Another author took it and modified it. If you are familiar with the Old Testament documentary hypothesis, compare this in the way to J versus E, which is later redacted by P. Think Spalding, Rigdon theory, or think Joseph had a pre-existing text, either ancient or modern, which he felt more and more confident over time to expand on. Blake Ostler's expansion theory, for instance. So his second theory here, one author wrote the entire work, and L voice represents regular voice creep that some authors have, stylistic drift, essentially. The Book of Mormon could have been a collaboration of two individuals where one individual dominated the first part and the other individual injected more of their voice over time. And you can see it here. This is in Mosiah priority order. The front part of the book looks like it has one author. This is, he says, let's see here. I'm trying really hard not to cheat the system. I decrease the natural impact of wherefore and therefore and use dozens of engrams in the model. This is the result of the trend by the chapter. So it shows that in the front half of the Book of Mormon, it appears to be one author. And then the back half of the Book of Mormon, it appears to be another. And then there's a slight shift sort of towards the end that looks just a little different than that middle section. And so that's where he says that that third voice potentially shows up. All right. He says, my work needs to be reviewed by an expert, which is harder than you think. We've had lots of bad Book of Mormon computer studies over the years, but these are my personal conclusions based only on the data analysis. And again, he said this at the time when he was in the church, pushing back against critics, asking people to stay, and fighting for a faithful explanation for the Book of Mormon. He said there are no more than 3 unique authors or contributors to the Book of Mormon. The variations between the sermon, narrator, and late voice can be sufficiently explained by my model, and the homogeneity of unique vocabulary patterns within the voices appears to be strong enough that it's unlikely there are more than 3 unique contributors. The Book of Mormon prophets, Mormon, Moroni, and Nephi, transform their own voice across these voices, from narrator to sermon, and in Mormon's case, even adding the late, in a way that has a similar variation that LDS researchers have formerly attributed to statistically unique voices. In other words, in the past, they've said these are unique voices. Book of Mormon Central is still claiming that. Meanwhile, the data really points to this can be fully explained at most of having 3 unique voices in the Book of Mormon. He says no traditional faithful explanations can explain the multiple voices. The best faithful explanation is that there are no multiple voices, and the voice is Joseph's voice that comes through with translation. In other words, you either have to have 26 authors or you have to have Joseph Smith. And if you just have 3, that better fits into a non-historical model. More research in comparison with other works should be done. By the way, I love his approach. His approach is, don't believe me, go do more work. Let's test this even further. He knows that there isn't a way to be certain with these things. And you always want to be careful of which side wants to limit the amount of information you have and which side is encouraging you to get all the information that you can. So he says more research in comparison with other works should be done to determine, number one, if the distinction between sermon and narrator is normal for one author. So we have to go look at other voices. And by the way, Book of Mormon Central sort of does that. And they say, yes, it is normal to have a very distinct separation between the character's voice, which would be sermon voices, and the narrator voice. That's normal for one author. Number two, if the concept of voice creep can adequately account for the late voice coming in at the end, statisticians should be aware of the logical explanations for 3 voices and account fully for this in studies, aka remove variation that correlates to the sermon narrative distinction. And I just want to say here, I'm not going to argue in favor of the Rigdon Spalding theory. It has its problems. But I want to note that the late voice coming in slightly before the plates of Nephi makes sense to me. The 116 pages are lost. Joseph is distraught over it, but he continues the project. He picks up after the 116 pages, translates dictates the entire translation of the Book of Mormon all the way to the end of Moroni, and then picks up Nephi. While he's doing that entire project, he knows he has to fill in the void for the 116 pages. And it's going to be a weird thing if he waits till he gets to the very end to suddenly go like, okay, now I'm on the spot. I have to come up with what Nephi is going to do. It would make more sense that along the way somewhere, he would start to practice inserting an idea. And again, this is based on the idea that Joseph Smith is working with some other text and that his own voice is the one that represents the late voice. And I'm not saying that's how it worked. I'm only saying that's a logical explanation if you take that theory to explain why the late voice shows up towards the end of the Book of Mormon, just prior to the plates of Nephi. Okay. So that's that one. He says, he finishes, and by the way, I love his integrity. I think he handles these things. I've known Randall, Bowen, Rob Terry for several years. I think he's a very honest person. I don't think he pulls any punches. I think he says what he feels and thinks. And the fact that he was able to hide behind a pseudonymous name also gave him the ability to be more frank and vulnerable, rather than live in fear like some of us do when the church doesn't really allow us to openly speak about things that challenge it. He says, this is my favorite theory because I think it perfectly fits the data, but worse theory because historically it's been well debunked, and the nature of the conspiracy makes it just too implausible. He says the idea here would be that Solomon Spalding wrote in the narrator voice. It's a cohesive narrative with Mormon as the primary and maybe only narrator. It's religious in nature in that it shows up in the North Americans. It shows the Native Americans descend from Israelites. Sorry about that. It's religious in nature in that it shows the Native Americans descend from Israelites, but it's not preachy. Sidney Rigdon steals the Spalding manuscript. Then Rigdon spends years inserting well-polished 19th century style sermons, especially including his Campbellite doctrine in the form of various call-outs from the narrative. Rigdon spends years working this over. Then Smith and Cowdery somehow get it and stage a translation process. Partway through the translation, one or both gets braver and starts inserting their own voice. This is the late voice. They greatly expand the story of Jesus coming to the Nephites. They add on Moroni. They start over with Nephi, and that becomes pretty pure late voice form. They still have the Rigdon Spalding material, but the purity and distinction of the narrator and sermon contrast that's so stark in the first half is gone. And I just want to note, he goes like, look, this theory can't be it. It's not, but it fits this data extremely well. And what he's basically saying is you could have, and he did say that, by the way, I talked to him on the phone today. He said you could have one author, and this could just be two things. One, stylistic drift, which we've talked about, and two, significant intention. The author really buckles down and gives a lot of intent to like, okay, I'm in narrator mode now. I have to talk like a narrator. I have to change my language. I have to use some different words. Okay, now I'm in sermon mode. I'm gonna do it this way. But he said that stretches it a little bit. Like it really isn't the most reasonable answer. The most reasonable answer is that you have two authors. He finishes off here. He says, for a variety of reasons, primarily unrelated to the subject of this post, such as logic, I explain in the CES letter reply post, I am a faithful Latter-day Saint. I love the Book of Mormon. I call it scripture, but I don't believe it's historical. I think there are a few good reasons to believe there was a pre-existing text that Joseph didn't write. Number one, the Book of Mormon is too consistent and complex in terms of intertextuality, geography, characters, King James Version Bible interaction, and mature in its doctrinal purity and profundity to think it was created in 90 days or even by Joseph alone with his age and experience. Number two, Joseph seems to translate the Book of Mormon and then move on from it. He doesn't seem to be familiar with it. He doesn't quote it. He doesn't rely on it. He doesn't expand on the stories, etc., as you would think he would do if he was the creator of it. Refer, for instance, to L. Ron Hubbard and how excited he was about his Dianetics book, right? Third, the textual evidence I present here implies a pre-existing text with pure sermon, narrator, and then a layered late voice on top of it. A reasonable counter is that the late is simply a voice creep of the same author. I don't find, and again, he doesn't buy into the Spalding-Rigdon theory. I don't find any theory satisfactory. I don't believe it's historical. I don't believe it's likely that Joseph wrote it himself. The conspiracy theories required for other theories are implausible, so it remains a mystery to me. My faith is that that it was inspired by God to Joseph. The actual mechanism of that, I have no idea. Okay, so I will simply finish here saying what Book of Mormon presented is challenged on multiple fronts. I'm not saying that there is a perfect idea out there, but I would say that there is research comparable to Book of Mormon Central, and there are lots of ways to see what they're talking about and to be able to disagree with it and to take a different stance. And some of that data significantly points to 1 to at most 3 authors, and certainly not 26.
Okay, I'll say a couple things. First off, thanks for taking the time to walk us through all of that. It's very interesting. I'm going to suggest that one person who's doing a narrative and then assumes the character of the person who's sermonizing could, by that very fact, it's a very different kind of narrative style. Well, one is narrative with the other sermonizing. That alone could account for the difference. And I think the main thing that I see that he's discovered that is really interesting to me is that there's a difference. All the narrative stuff lines up, all the sermon stuff lines up as if it's the same voice. I would suggest that all the "and it came to passes," each one of those has at least 2 contextualized words. None of that happens in any of the sermons. It's strictly a narrative thing. Mm-hmm. That also could lead to separating the 2 as well. I'm not saying that's the only thing. It's just an example of a narrative voice versus a sermonizing voice.
Yeah, and your idea is backed up by this stylistic drift, which would suggest that there's one author.
Yeah, and I can see that happening because, I mean, you use different vocabulary. For example, when I was in Japan, I was fluent as long as I was talking about something relating to the missionary discussions. So within this very small orb of vocabulary in Japanese language, I could knock it out of the park. You get me on pretty much any other subject, and I'm going, I don't know what you're talking about. So maybe that has something to do with it too. What do you think about all this, Rebecca?
Oh, let's see. I have 2 thoughts. The first is I think Scott Christopher and Book of Mormon Central are right. The evidence is in the text. It really is. That is what we have. And I love to see these continuing analyses being done because, as Dr. John Lundwall says, scholarship is 20 years behind. So all the faithful friends and family that I have are still talking about the scholarship on this, the multiple authors from the 80s or the 90s, or they have not caught up to this yet. And yet here it is. So I look forward to the day where this is more widely known just by the common member. But the problem with it is that the Book of Mormon absolutely must be historical. So unless it has all those multiple authors and it is historical, it just doesn't work. And Mormonism doesn't work. And you have to think that through.
And I want to add one last thing. Rob Terry reached out to BYU and the folks that put forth this data. And like all the other things that we've covered about Book of Mormon Central and A Marvelous Work, How Great the Evidence, they never want to share the other side. He has given them his data. He has shared with them why he thinks the data is best understood in something way less than 26 voices, and they continue to ignore him and not let their audience know that there is at least another way to see this, which would completely contradict what they're sharing. And they did that with the name of Alma. They do it with Chiasmus. They do it with every evidence that we've shown so far. There's a counter argument that I think is stronger that they've completely ignored even sharing.
Unless they accidentally mention it in the movie
Right.
before they get to the evidence. You know?
Right. That's
A
the only
Freudian
time.
slip. This
Yes, we'll
whole
talk about
episode is
Shakespeare. We'll
full
talk
of that.
about Dracula.
Yep.
Okay, I think, Rebecca, we're to the last segment, which
We
you've
have the
got.
last segment, and it's not going to be very long, so this is going to be great. Let me ask you guys, how does each Book of Mormon Central marvelous work episode end? There's always a common denominator in the final scene.
The drone backs off.
No, yeah, right.
Music plays.
No, after the second one, I'm not sure. Was it in the first one? But I know in the second one that they spend an inordinate amount of time talking to it's so far it's been a widow, but talking to an individual who wants to share their testimony about the Book of Mormon and how it was they joined the church.
Yep, that's exactly right. Because as Scott says over and over, sure, there's evidence. We don't really need evidence. Let me talk to you about your testemony. That's
We
exactly
don't need no
it.
stinking badges.
Exactly. So let's go to my slides really quick.
We're on the search for evidence. He's like, he's got the split personality thing going.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the editing. Maybe it's the writing.
And just FYI,
we're on the track for evidence. We're looking for evidence. And over here, we don't care about any evidence. All we care about is the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
It looks like the first slide is a video segment.
Yep. We're going to start there.
Right,
absolutely. Yep. This is where he goes to visit with a wonderful woman in London.
Yorkshire.
Yep. Hopefully it'll play.
Maybe they made it private now. They don't want people watching.
Oh, maybe
that's not it.
Yeah. I have to say with him, I felt like I was watching General Conference. Did you get that sense? Although his data was amazing.
Yeah, I thought it was Reese again.
Few slideshow. Here we go.
What's more important than anything scientists or a historian can teach us about the Book of Mormon is the life-altering impact it can have on people every day. That's where we're headed now, to talk to just an everyday person about the impact of the Book of Mormon. Now we're headed there. Okie doke.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think that Scott is feeling some cognitive dissonance as these episodes go on. It seems to me that he's stress eating a lot. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but he's always got a bag of snacks. So yes, as he said, what we discussed before, it doesn't matter the evidence, it doesn't matter all of this. It's all about conversion. It's about what the Book of Mormon means to you personally. It's about your feelings. So I think I have one more clip. After this, unless you guys have anything to say about that, this is where he's going to go meet with a woman who has a kind of amazing conversion story.
Yes.
That's all I knew.
Wow.
And I think it was sometime the next year, I found an address for, it must have been the Hyde Park Visitor Centre in London. So I wrote a letter to them explaining I was interested in the word of wisdom and could I get more information.
And did they write back to you?
Eventually, a few months later, me and my sister were watching Batman on the telly. So anyway, the missionaries came to the door. When I opened the door, they said, "Did you write this?" And they had the letter in the hand. I said to them, "Have you got a Book of Mormon?" And they said, "No, we haven't." And I'm like, oh no, I'm never going to get one.
What kind of missionaries did we have in the 70s?
The next time they came, they brought a Book of Mormon. So I was really happy about that.
You finally got your hands
Finally got,
on a Book of Mormon.
Yeah. And I just read it and read it. I couldn't put it down. And
How long did it take you to read it, do you think?
I think just under 2 weeks, something like that.
What were you feeling? I mean, when you finally got your hands on it and you started to read it, I mean, do you remember kind of how it made you feel?
I hadn't finished it before I knew it was true.
Was it a new feeling? That sweetness, that joy?
It was just a peaceful feeling. a comforting kind of feeling.
And at a certain point, did the idea of baptism come up?
Yes, the baptism came up. My parents said, no, you're not getting baptized. And I knew I would have to wait till I was 18, and that seemed forever.
Yeah, so there you go. And you have the part that we missed at the beginning is she had been reading as a teenager a weight loss magazine, and they mentioned that Mormons were very healthy, had low cancer rates. And so she was trying to find out about the word of wisdom, and therefore started trying to find out about the Book of Mormon. So, but if you notice Scott there, he definitely, is that what they call leading the witness, RFM? Is that sweet,
is.
special feeling?
It manifests all the traits of having gone over a story with somebody, and then
Yeah.
you get the camera going, and all of a sudden they can't remember it, so you have to lead them on.
Yeah.
That's probably what's going on. Is her name Wendy?
Her name is Wendy. There's
I
so
don't-
many
I-
Wendy's
you know,
in the world.
I have 3 words to say about Wendy. Yeah, baby. Yeah.
Goodness.
Oh, come on. That's Austin Powers' mom right there.
It is. So, all right. For the sake of time, we won't go through the next clip, but then her parents kind of get concerned with her. And this is, again, where Book of Mormon Central in this video does the same thing. They literally tell people that parents are concerned. It's like this backhanded way that they talk. But she tells us that her parents were really concerned. They wanted to stop her participation in the church. They make her send back all of her materials. She isn't even allowed to mention church in the home. And she has to just rely on scriptures that she's memorized, to kind of keep her connected to the church. Then suddenly it's a miracle. One day her dad looks at her on a Sunday morning and says, "Would you like me to take you to church?" And she says, "Yes, I would." This is 9 months after the freeze out with no church. And then she receives an inspiration of the perfect time to ask her mother, while they're stripping wallpaper, if she can be baptized. And then she is baptized. And it looks like from this picture in the video, she served a mission, and she just continues, to bear this testimony that means so much to her. So I think this is our final clip with Scott talking to her. Or maybe this is the final one of the whole episode. We'll see. I can't remember.
The turpentine fumes help with getting someone to agree with you.
This is true. This is true.
So I was able to get baptized, being new to the church and learning. I was at college at Durham, and it was quite a long bus ride every day. So I take the scriptures and read them on the bus. And one day, this man who was sitting behind, he said, "Oh, what's that book you're reading?" And I said, "Book of Mormon." And he said, "Oh, can I have a look at it?" So I gave it to him, and I didn't realize my name and address was in it. So he gave it back to me. And then the next week, I got a big, thick envelope through the post, about 10 pages thick. And it was all anti-Mormon stuff.
What did you, I mean, you're still a young girl. Did you read through it?
I had a look at it.
What did you think?
And I thought, oh, well, I'd never heard of any of this stuff before. And I just ripped it up eventually, and I never got back in touch with the man or anything like that.
Wow. So what would you say to someone who's facing opposition in terms of either finding, receiving, being able to have the gospel in their lives?
I would just say, keep praying about it. Because if you haven't got anything else, you've always got prayer. Heavenly Father's always there for you. The only way you can know about the Book of Mormon, if it's true, is to read it yourself and study it and really find out for yourself and not listen to what other people have to say. And test Moroni's promise at the end.
Wendy, thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
It has
Scott.
been such a treat. Thank you for coming down here and meeting with us and sharing your testimony and your story of your conversion and the role the Book of Mormon has played. Once again, we have been spiritually fed, and we just thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So once again, and I have to say, Wendy seems like a lovely woman, absolutely lovely. But RFM's going, no, yes, I think she seems lovely. But again, in this short segment, they have inadvertently told people, Some parents do not want their kids to join. That was my mother's situation. She was a similar age back in the 60s when she joined. Some parents say, absolutely not. They take away your materials. They have huge problems with the church. And then total strangers, whether or not it's connected or not, perhaps it was Sandrich and Gerald Tanner that sent her a packet. There is literature out there that shows you a truth that you may not want to hear when it comes to the Book of Mormon. So it just seems like in every segment of this episode, there's this backhanded way of getting people information. So there might be a mole. I don't know. What did you guys think quickly about this very final segment?
Well, what I thought were two things. First off, I'm glad she tore up that huge, thick parcel of 10 pages that came to her in the mail, because apparently she's been studying at the David Alexander School of Apologetics.
Oh, that's right.
Don't read it. Just tear it up. That's how you deal with counter arguments. And I do think Scott Christopher, excuse me. Scott Christopher, being the comedian that he is, I'm sure that he wanted to name this segment of the episode, "The Mormon Who Shagged Me."
You just won't let that Austin Powers thing go, will you?
Do I make you Randy?
He's been at it all week. It's terrible.
Well, I'm not the one who made the meme. Yeah. And actually, we're ready to put it up on the screen.
Don't you ever put that on the screen.
Rebecca.
Wendy is a lovely woman. Stop.
Just kidding. It's okay. Bill.
Okay, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple things. You just hit on it. These guys are telling you don't read the other side's material. David Alexander says don't read the other side's material. Dan Peterson won't name us. He won't say, he'll say somewhere off in the internet something was said about this, but he won't ever tell people where it's said. One side of the aisle wants you to be very isolated, only seeing things from the insider group's perspective. The other side, us and the other critics that are out there, say, go read everything. Don't believe me. Don't believe Radio Free Mormon or Rebecca Biblioteca. Go read everything. Investigate all sides. Take in all the information, because that's your best chance at making an informed, educated decision about what you'll believe and how you'll devote your life. If you believe after that, great, but consider both sides. When somebody tells you not to consider the other side, anywhere else in life, you would call that dangerous. You would call that not appropriate. You would think that's unhealthy. But somehow when you're a believer on the inside of the group, you start with the assumption that your church is the truth teller. It's told you that everyone else is the liar, and it's told you to stay away from all of that material. And so you believe them, and that's what you do. But it's your least likely chance to make an educated, informed decision about how you'll lead your life, like Randall Bowen did, because he's a neo-apologist on the inside, like we do on a regular basis. Go read all sides of an issue, take in as much information as possible. It's your best chance to make an educated decision about how you live out the rest of your existence.
Amen.
Oh, one more thing, Rebecca.
Oh, yeah.
Can I just put up on the screen here really quick? This will be really quick. And this whole video is about two things. Yeah. Discard anti-Mormon material. Don't ever look at it. And pray about the Book of Mormon, get a witness, and stay in the church, right? So I would just suggest to people, go on YouTube and watch the video Spiritual Witnesses. It goes through lots of people from various faiths who have similar spiritual experiences to Mormons who pray about the Book of Mormon. Secondary video, Can She Really Know, does the same thing. It even has an FLDS girl at the beginning bearing her testimony, and her testimony sounds so Mormon. How could you distinguish that her group is wrong and your group is right? And any way that you delineate that is going to run into logical problems. And then I just wanted to point out, you mentioned David Alexander, his most recent episode talking about Mormon story, CES letter, Pastor Jeff, shun like the plague. Don't listen to those guys. They're the bad guys. And anywhere else in life, you would run away from someone who says, only listen to our version of events.
Or trusted sources, right?
Yeah.
Only listen to trusted sources. That was the thing, Celestial. We do have one more clip where Scott just kind of brings it all home. I don't know if you guys think we have time to show that. It's just the final where he just kind of brings it all together.
In for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah.
Being here in England, a land where literature has shaped the consciousness of society for generations, and master authors have penned some of the greatest books of our time, has been a real treat for me. The power of literary evidence for the Book of Mormon is undeniable. But I know for myself and for millions of others around the world, including Wendy Lynch, that the most powerful evidence of the Book of Mormon is its spiritual witness. The teachings of Jesus Christ, the plain and precious truths of his doctrine and plan of happiness, and how all of that impacts people's everyday lives. Still, the literary evidence that we've discussed in this episode, like chiasmus and stylometry, are 2 more logs on the fire of the Book of Mormon's non-spiritual evidence. And there are hundreds more that come from within the pages of the book itself.
Hundreds.
But now it's time, I think, we get back to checking out more physical evidence, the where, the what, and the if so, how variety. We live in an exciting time where evidence is coming forth from the dust in greater and greater abundance.
Excellent.
So join me on our next adventure as we continue to uncover the evidence, build faith, and share the miracle that is a marvelous work.
There he goes. I don't think he knows what the word evidence means. I think he doesn't really understand what that word
Nobody knows
is.
what the meaning of the word cliff is.
But did you hear what he said? We all heard it. Now they're going to move back to physical evidence. I thought they had put forth all of their physical evidence in the first episode, and then after that, it was all the text itself. So I'm really surprised. I can't even imagine what they're going to pull out.
Like, can I make my prediction?
Yeah,
they're going to go back to Nahum and the altars.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Bountiful. They're going to go to Bountiful.
the Jewish ritual that's barely noticeable in the Book of
It's
Mormon.
the Feast of Tabernacles. It's all over King Benjamin's speech, you infidel.
It does make our job easy. This material pretty much writes itself, doesn't it?
Does. That's why
I
Bill's
used to argue
going,
this from the other side. I used to be on their team. I'm still waiting for them to contact me so I can talk about ancient Hebrew numerology in the Book of Mormon. Boom, baby. It's better than anything they've mentioned so far.
Oh, man.
Not
Good
a high
stuff.
bar, but still.
I hope they continue. I hope there's 10 more of these.
Yeah. John Welch is going to get very, very tired.
Yeah,
Keep coming back
chiasmus.
for more and more appearances for his chiasmus thing.
I have a funny feeling that Rabbi Joe won't be on again. Well, all right, you guys. I did put the phone call thing at the bottom. I haven't.
By the way, I don't think Gary Rinsberg's going to be on again either.
No, I don't think so.
no, not at all.
It'll be interesting to see who the next witnesses are from outside the faith that are experts on things.
Mm-hmm.
But we might bring Reed Moon back. There are many artifacts there in that little bookstore that perhaps could be used as physical evidence.
Yeah. Like watches.
We'll have to see. Like
Every arrow points to the ancient narrative of the Book of Mormon.
All roads lead to Zarahemla.
That's right.
And all the logs on the bonfire that are burning the Book of Mormon down, right?
I know. I actually clipped that because I thought that was an unfortunate use of words or whoever wrote that for him. It's another 2 logs on the fire of the Book of Mormons.
Zarahemla in Guatemala or Zarahemla in Wisconsin?
Guatemala.
Okay.
But isn't Zarahemla? I thought that was like across the river from Illinois. Isn't that Iowa?
Oh, I was just trying to come up with something that
Montrose
would be
is over
funny.
there. But yeah, I think it's Iowa. I think Zarahemla is in Iowa, and I think Rod Meldrum has conclusively proven that.
Conclusively.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there aren't any calls in the call bank. So we can just close out the show and call it a night if you want, or I can shout the number and we can wait a few minutes.
What do you think? We're at 2.5 hours. I mean, given last week when you were just hanging up on people willy-nilly, maybe they don't want to call anymore. Maybe they're tired of enduring this kind of abuse.
Well, let's give them a minute. So let's join the call-in portion of the show with the number 662-667-6667. Phone lines are completely open, and we'll be happy to take your call. Any other thoughts you guys have on the show while we give a few minutes for folks to call in and see if that happens?
Underwhelming.
Every episode has been underwhelming. Every episode's been pretty easy to show the deep holes in their argument. It really is pretty weak, isn't it?
I feel like
Yeah.
every episode is kind of in a time warp. Like I said, a lot of these evidences were the big, exciting evidences of like the 80s and 90s and early 2000. Scholarship has moved past that, but these are still the ones that they're repackaging in this slick program. But to me, they seem really dated. But of course, the common member is not going to understand that.
Maybe
What do you
they'll
think?
bring on
Oh,
that little tiny postage stamp size gold book fake that had everybody so excited a month ago.
Yeah.
yeah, they'll have to scrap that episode, won't they?
Who knows? I have
They
no
might use
idea what
it.
they're going to do. They'll probably come on and say, evidence.
What do you think about the integrity of what they're doing? Again, Book of Mormon Central has enough informed apologists as part of its staff to know that they are saying things that are manipulating an audience into a belief while knowing that what they're not sharing or the way they're sharing it is disingenuous at the least. I think unethical at the worst. And they seem to have no problem, as Rebecca said, pulling out all these old apologetics that have been absolutely just chopped down, or at the very least, in most instances, in the very least, there are other pieces of data that would counter it and offer a different perspective, and they avoid that completely.
Yeah, I think apologetics is one of the most utilitarian of pursuits. The ends will always justify the means.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We do have a call in the call bank. So this is, I believe, Matt. So let me check here. Matt, are you there? Oh, let me switch you over to
Hope it's Matt Roper.
I don't think it will be, but let's check.
Hello?
Yeah, Matt, go ahead. You're on Mormonism Live.
Wonderful. Hi. This is not really like this is more of a heartland question, but I was talking to the Heartlander the other day, and I was like, where'd all the steel from those battles go? And they said, that's dug up by farmers in the 1800s and early 1900s and melted down and used for farm tools. Where does that apologetic come from? And like, what's the easiest answer? I'm like, all the farmers collected all of the things? What's going on here?
Of course they did, because they had
have
out
you
their
heard
little
that
metal
before? And
detectors and walking back and forth over Cumorah so they could find these metal things. By the way, Matt, that is in direct opposition to what, Rod Meldrum said on Mormon Stories when he was asked the same question. And what he said at that time was that the Lamanites took it with them. They stripped the soldiers, they took every single thing from them, and they took it with them, which of course fails to, I mean, it answers why there's nothing around the hill Cumorah, but it doesn't answer how come it's not anywhere else in the Americas.
right, or how come like people are still finding weapons and artifacts from ancient Roman battles and battles on the European continent? Like they couldn't have done it all.
Different weather, corrosive soil. There's lots of good explanations for that.
Roman coins are so plentiful that they're
Well, that's-
basically worth about what, is stamped on their face.
Or God took it up to
Well,
heaven.
I just-
this. That's when I hear all the time. There is no evidence so that we can exercise faith.
I'm gonna have to find that clip and show it to my Heartlander.
Oh, good luck. It's only like,
that
80 hours. But it's in there somewhere, I guarantee
Well, that's
you.
all I had for you.
Even John thought that interview was too long.
Well, they finally did it the third time. They finally had the interview they wanted to have the first and second time on the third time.
Yeah.
But they got it.
Well, thanks. That's all I had. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks for calling in, Matt.
Bye.
And that was the only call in the call bank, so we can probably just close it
There
out.
it is. Awesome.
Okay. Great. Who's in charge tonight? Am I in charge?
Doesn't matter to me. Be in charge.
Okay, I'll finish it. I'll close it off. Okay. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Mormonism Live, including you too, Rebecca. It was great to have you. What a wonderful guest you've been on the show. You brought so much to the show. Bill, you were wonderful. I was okay too. Everybody, thanks for watching. If you know anybody who is being influenced in any kind of positive way by this show, A Marvelous Work, please feel free to send this to them so that they can have both sides of the story. Thanks for watching. Please join us next week, Wednesday, for Mormonism Live, same bat time, same bat channel. Good night, everybody.
I was watching the telly and Batman was on, and there was a knock at the door. Yeah, baby. Yeah.